Chapter 642, Conquer 5 Levels, Defeat 6 Generals, Take Down the Scarecrow First. The Scarecrow's eyes snapped wide in terror. He'd been certain that, shielded by the fear gas, he'd claim victory in this contest. He couldn't have been more wrong. Collapsing to the ground, his heart thundering in his chest, he watched in horror as blood pounded from the bullet wound, staining his uniform a deep, angry red. He simply could not believe that this man, Ethan, had stayed lucid under a concentration of fear gas 5 times stronger than any standard dosage. Even more astounding, Ethan had hit his mark with lethal precision. A quintuple strength dose would drive almost anyone into mindless panic or send them spiraling into terror-induced death. Yet Ethan stood there like a living weapon, no tremor in his hands, no hint of fear in his eyes, only cold, unyielding determination. How? How is this possible? The Scarecrow gasped, voice trembling with despair. Ethan said nothing. He lifted his pistol with deliberate calm, leveled it at the Scarecrow's temple, and waited. In his gaze there was no mercy, only the unwavering resolve of a hunter about to claim his prey. Ethan's voice cut through the stifling darkness, cold and unyielding as the gates of Hades themselves. To hell with your fear. Go play with the devil and his demons. In an instant, the crack of his pistol cracked like thunder. The Scarecrow's head erupted in a crimson bloom, spraying blood across the walls. For a heartbeat, the villain's eyes burned with shock and defiance, then went dark as he collapsed into the black void. Around him, the poisonous haze of his own terror gas dissipated, leaving only the pool of his cooling body on the floor. Without hesitation, Ethan advanced. Level after level fell before him. 5 floors conquered, 6 generals cut down in his relentless march. Each fatal shot was another ripple in the night's calm, but the final death, Scarecrow's, was the boulder that shattered the Mirror Lake. Far above, Arkham Asylum trembled. In the instant the villain fell, some hidden signal must have triggered within its walls. The inmates, long bottled up by restraint and routine, snapped free like wild horses. Doors burst open. Windows shivered and shattered. Desks, chairs, even sections of wall were torn away in their frenzy. Madness roared through every corridor, turning the once-ordered institution into a smoldering ruin drenched in chaos. And at the eye of this storm stood Ethan, gun still warm in his hand, watching the asylum's collapse with icy detachment, ready for whatever darkness came next. A terrifying, discordant symphony filled the night air, screams and roars, manic laughter and desperate cries echoing off the walls and sending chills down every spine. Each note dripped with madness and despair, laying bare the torment writhing in countless hearts. Amid this bedlam, a group of hardened criminals saw their chance. They whispered fervently to one another, forging a desperate plan to exploit the chaos and break free from the asylum's walls, an opportunity they believed would never come again. In their eyes glinted the fevered promise of freedom. But they underestimated the true horror lurking deeper within these corridors. The long-forgotten patients, whose minds have slipped entirely into madness. Unpredictable and violent, these men and women can strike without warning, sometimes at each other, often at any intruder who crosses their path. Many escape plots are cut short when a deranged patient, driven by inscrutable impulses, rises up and slaughters the conspirators. Friend and foe mean nothing to these tortured souls. Their erratic, savage behavior defies all attempts at defense. In this asylum, the greatest threat is not the locked doors or the guards. It is the madness that dwells within its walls, waiting for prey. Arkham Asylum looms like a vast, ticking trap, ready to swallow anyone bold enough to cross its threshold. Right now, several news helicopters from Gotham hover overhead, their powerful searchlights seeing the night. The reporters below jockey for the most gripping shots of the asylum's madness, desperate to expose its raw, terrifying reality. Spotlights slice through the darkness, illuminating every twisted corner of the grounds. Under that harsh glare, inmates' faces twist into grotesque masks of fear and rage, while hardened criminals glare back with calculating, hungry eyes. Amid the chaos, the cameras lock onto Ethan, known across the city as the Knight of Light, and follow his every movement. His resolute figure stands out against the frenzy, and each expression on his face is broadcast live across Gotham, giving citizens front-row seats to their hero's courageous stand. Look, that's our Knight of Light up there. He's facing down those maniacs and criminals all on his own. He's incredible. Just seeing him gives me a sense of security. I know he'll pull through. He's our hero. Citizens on the streets exchanged excited whispers, their faces lit with admiration and relief. As long as the Knight of Light was watching over Gotham, they believed peace would hold. Still, not everyone shared that confidence. A few voices drifted through the crowd, cautious and uncertain. He may be powerful, one bystander said, but the inmates at Arkham Asylum aren't ordinary thugs. These people are dangerous. Can he really handle them? I heard this attack was planned, another murmured. Several gangs, even some foreign mercenaries, have joined forces to take him down, and they've apparently smuggled in special weapons designed just for fighting him. Though spoken softly, these doubts spread like an undercurrent through the crowd. Their worry for the Knight of Light mirrored a deeper fear of Arkham's brand of madness and evil, and of the secret arsenal those villains might unleash against their protector. Batman observed Arkham Asylum from a concealed vantage point, cloaked in shadow. His black suit and cowl melded seamlessly with the darkness, while his keen eyes pierced the dim corridors, tracking every inmate and disturbed criminal within. Citizens continued to debate his every move, but he paid them no mind. His thoughts were far too tangled. He had intended to breach the asylum alone, to round up every madman in one swift strike. Then the Terminator appeared, and everything changed. He knew the machine's brutal power and near unstoppable nature, and understood that if left unchecked, it could slaughter everyone inside these walls. A surge of determination pushed him to his feet. He could not simply watch Arkham descend into deeper chaos, nor could he stand by as the Terminator carried out its deadly mission. Drawing a steadying breath, he checked his utility belt, secured his grapnel gun, and steeled himself for the battle ahead. Tonight, he would save Arkham's inmates from the Terminator and prove once more that darkness was no match for his resolve. Chapter 643, Unstoppable. Meanwhile, deep within Arkham Asylum, Deathstroke watched in silence. Like a cheetah crouched in the shadows, he was ready to pounce at the slightest provocation. His black leather jacket clung to him like a second skin, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light and lending him an air of cold menace. On his lips played a thin, knowing smile, as if he had already seen through every disguise, every lie. He let out a quiet sneer at the convoluted schemes of the underworld bosses and the asylum's own wardens. In his mind, the Terminator stood alone as an unbeatable force. Anyone who believed they could stand against him was fooling themselves. The Terminator's strength and skill far exceeded those of ordinary men. He moved through battle like a merciless machine, crushing every obstacle in his path without hesitation. Yet even Deathstroke knew that legends could fall. If a power strong enough ever emerged to contain the Terminator, it would shatter the myth of his invincibility once and for all. Ethan had been keeping a close eye on the goings-on inside Arkham Asylum, determined to learn whether they'd really developed any hidden weapons. Now, as he moved swiftly through the cavernous corridors of the facility's core, his footsteps were measured and sure. His gaze, sharp as a searchlight, swept every shadow and alcove. He knew all too well that this part of Arkham was a nest of danger and madness. Without warning, the floor trembled beneath his boots, a deep, violent shudder like something stirring in the earth itself. Instinctively, Ethan jerked his head up. In the next instant, an entire section of the wall exploded outward, showering him with plaster, brick, and choking dust. He dropped into a low stance, eyes blazing through the haze. From the rubble emerged several hulking figures, each grotesquely distorted. Their skin writhed with bulging blue veins. Their limbs were twisted into unnatural angles. These were once common criminals, now transformed by injections of Titan venom, discarded dregs of society turned into savage monsters. Fueled by inhuman strength and driven insane by the serum, they unleashed bestial roars that reverberated off the walls. Then, with terrifying speed, they lunged at Ethan. He tightened his grip on his weapon, braced his stance, and prepared to fight. The criminal's eyes seethed with madness and violence, as if they intended to obliterate everything in their path. But Ethan felt no fear. He lunged forward. His first punch exploded outward, ripping through the air with a muted boom, flesh and bone meeting force. One thug was hurled against the wall, crashing through it so violently that only a single leg remained visible, twitching grotesquely in the rubble. The rest of the gang stood frozen, just long enough for Ethan to unleash 3 more thunderous strikes in rapid succession. Each blow landed with devastating precision. Their bodies soared in wide arcs before plummeting to the floor, unconscious. Ethan moved like a finely tuned machine. Every punch was delivered with pinpoint accuracy and brutal power. Every kick was rock solid and unflinching. His technique, tempered by relentless training, was ruthlessly efficient. Even seasoned boxers couldn't hope to match his speed, much less withstand his assault. Ethan's assault left the criminals unrecognizable, nothing more than shredded limbs and fragments of flesh scattered across the blood-soaked ground. Their life's blood pooled into the gravel and dust, painting a grisly, nightmarish tableau. High above, in Arkham Asylum's surveillance hub, Bane watched the carnage unfold on multiple screens. His jaw set in a hard line, brow furrowing as he absorbed what he saw. His power far exceeds anything Batman or even those injected with Titan venom can muster, he murmured to himself. Moments later, Bane pushed back from the console. He'd long believed he understood his adversaries, Batman, the deranged inmates of Arkham, even the remorseless criminals he routinely dispatched. But the arrival of the Terminator had shattered all his assumptions. Unlike any foe before, the Terminator showed no interest in capturing or interrogating Arkham's escapees. Instead, it tore through them without hesitation, leaving nothing behind to exploit. Physical and psychological exhaustion, Bane's usual weapons, would prove useless here. He needed a new strategy. Tonight's chaos would serve as his testing ground. Bane would use the pandemonium of Arkham's darkest hour to probe the Terminator's true capabilities, its intelligence, its adaptability, its weaknesses. One thing was certain, this machine was no ordinary opponent, and Bane would never again underestimate it. Bane paced in front of the bank of monitors, studying every flicker of movement. The Terminator's strength and speed far outmatched any conventional opponent. No ordinary tactics would work. He needed a new plan, and first, he had to uncover a vulnerability. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The machine's body was nearly indestructible, its power seemingly limitless. Yet Bane refused to be discouraged. Every opponent, no matter how formidable, harbors a flaw. It was only a matter of time and patience before he found it. As the seconds ticked by, Bane mentally cataloged every detail. How did the Terminator reposition its weight? Where did its power surge? Which joints moved most fluidly, and which might be slightly more exposed? He jotted notes and replayed footage, determined to pinpoint any chink in the armor. But the battle was far from over. Bane sighed. This was just the opening act. The true contest lay ahead. Suddenly, a colossal shadow filled the narrow corridor behind Ethan. He froze, heart pounding. The wingspan was enormous, so vast it nearly spanned the entire hallway. For a split second he thought, Batman? No, Bruce Wayne's symbol might be a bat, but he'd never attack at a critical moment like this. The shadow detached itself from the darkness and landed in a thunder of leathery wings. A lean, imposing figure clung to the wall, human in shape but unmistakably bat-like, Kurt Langston. Ethan braced himself. This was no routine ambush. With the Batman's arrival, the real fight was about to begin. Ethan rounded the corner and froze. Blocking the corridor stood Dr. Grodd, Kurt Vogel, once a brilliant zoologist renowned for his research into bat echolocation, now a grotesque, half-man, half-bat creature. Kurt had injected himself with an experimental serum made from bat DNA to cure his lifelong deafness. The treatment had worked better than he dared hope, but the side effects were catastrophic. Kurt's wings flexed, and his ragged screech sliced through the air, rattling Ethan's bones. He lunged, razor-sharp claws outstretched. Instinctively, Ethan leapt forward, catching Kurt's arms in a vice-like grip. Bent double by the weight of the beast, Kurt howled in fury. With a fierce heave, Ethan wrenched the creature apart at the waist. The corridor erupted in a splatter of dark blood and tissue, the stench of iron filling every corner. Before Kurt's broken body could even begin to twitch, Ethan smashed open a thermite grenade and hurled it into the wreckage. The relentless blaze consumed bones and sinew until nothing remained but smoldering ash. Despite a nagging doubt whether the mutagenic serum might somehow allow Kurt to regenerate, Ethan had no choice. When a monster is born, it must be finished. He waited until the last ember died before stepping away. The corridor, slick with gore and acrid smoke, reminded him that there was no turning back. Pocketing his now empty grenade casing, Ethan moved on, with Kurt Vogel reduced to nothing more than a cautionary footnote, but discovered, almost immediately, that dispatching one terror was only the beginning. A new obstacle lay just ahead, demanding all of his skill and resolve. Chapter 634, Killing Machine. The moonlight cast long, twisted shadows across the open courtyard of Arkham Asylum, turning an already tense scene into something more sinister. At its center stood Ethan, known to his enemies as the Terminator, his posture rigid, eyes cold as steel. Before him, a dozen policemen, security guards, doctors, and nurses trembled in a loose semicircle, their uniforms stained with sweat and fear. They had already seen the destruction Ethan could wreak. They had no wish to test his limits. Not far off, a cadre of gangsters held their weapons loosely, but with threatening intent. Their bravado had evaporated in the face of Ethan's ruthless reputation. Now they resorted to a darker tactic: hostages. One by one, they jostled the terrified officers forward, pressing the muzzles of handguns into their backs. Every trigger finger itched to pull, yet the men were well aware that in this hour, any shot fired could unleash a massacre. Ethan's gaze swept methodically over the hostages, their faces gaunt, eyes hollow from the night's horrors. Neither pleading looks nor whispered prayers moved him. He had one mission: to neutralize the threat with absolute precision. But the gangsters wanted leverage, and innocent lives were their bargaining chips. Hidden in the darkness at the edge of the courtyard, Batman watched with unblinking intensity. He'd followed Ethan here, but he refused to gamble on the Terminator's mercy. Whether Ethan chose negotiation or violence, Batman had only one priority: saving the hostages. His cape fluttered silently as he searched for an opening, any flaw in the gangsters' formation or momentary distraction in Ethan's unwavering stance. This was Gotham's deadliest standoff. Hostages pressed against cold concrete, guns leveled, and two of the city's greatest warriors poised on opposite sides of a knife's edge. And all the while, the night held its breath. From a distance, Deathstroke watched the standoff unfold with a faint, amused smile. He knew this was a rare opportunity to see how Gotham's new guardian, the Terminator, would handle an impossible choice. With a TV news helicopter hovering overhead and its camera lens trained on the rooftop of Arkham Asylum, all of Gotham held its breath. If the Terminator refused to act, the world would see him fail the city. If he moved to rescue the hostages, the criminals vowed bloodshed. On the rooftop, the criminals snarled and thrust their guns forward. "Drop your weapons and surrender," one of them bellowed, voice echoing against the asylum walls. They believed they had the Terminator exactly where they wanted him. In a society bound by moral codes, they figured no hero could risk the lives of innocents. As long as the hostages were alive, their leverage would force the Terminator's hand. But instead of complying, the Terminator remained perfectly still. His armored form made no move toward the criminals, nor did he lower his own weapon. He simply stood, unwavering, his visor reflecting the pale dawn light, as if calculating every variable before making his next move. Ethan knew that every choice he made would determine the fate of those hostages. Yet, he also understood that if he gave in now, these criminals, and the madman they served, would go on inflicting terror across Gotham. Perched in the shadows, Batman studied Ethan's every twitch with a mixture of concern and restraint. He recognized the fierce dilemma Ethan faced, but as Gotham's protector, he dared not reveal himself, at least not until he was certain how best to help. Nearby, Deathstroke lounged against the ruined facade of the old cathedral, his expression one of cold amusement. He couldn't have cared less about the lives dangling in the balance. To him, this was simply high-stakes entertainment. Above them, the TV news helicopter hovered like a colossal mechanical eye, its spotlight sweeping over the rooftop and its camera broadcasting every heartbeat of the standoff. Down below, Gotham's citizens paused in the streets, craning their necks skyward. They watched, breathless, knowing that the outcome of this confrontation would shape their city's future. For a tense moment, silence fell, broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the soft whir of the helicopter's rotors. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, Ethan braced himself and stepped forward. ready to end the impasse once and for all. Ethan's hand steadied around the pistol's grip as he lifted it, the barrel trained on the criminals who cowered behind their hostages. Every muscle in his frame spoke of iron resolve. Although his eyes were cold and steely, they never wavered from the trembling men and women he'd come to protect. Their terror and helplessness the only things that mattered to him in that moment. "Do you really think you can intimidate me with innocent lives?" His voice cracked through the charged air like ice. "I'm no hero in a storybook. Your threats won't make me hesitate." His words cut through the tension, stripping away the criminals' bravado. Fear flickered across their faces as they exchanged panicked glances. One of them barked in desperation, "Do it! Shoot a few hostages! Maybe then he'll back down." Before the words had fully left his lips, Ethan moved. In the space of a heartbeat, he vanished from view and then reappeared, unleashing a thunderous volley of gunfire. The shots came so fast they sounded like a sudden downpour, each round finding its mark. When the echoes faded, Ethan stood firm, pistol trained and breathing steady. The attackers were down, and the hostages, though shaken, were safe. He let out a long, quiet breath and holstered his weapon, eyes still scanning for any remaining threat. In that silent aftermath, it was clear. No act of cruelty would ever force him to waver. Ethan's fingers squeezed the trigger, unleashing a rapid staccato of gunfire, a brutal symphony of death. Each shot found its mark with surgical precision. One by one, the criminals crumpled, their skulls fracturing as crimson sprays splashed the walls. Thick clouds of gunpowder smoke curled through the room, stinging lungs and eyes with acrid bitterness. Through the haze, the hostages remained miraculously unharmed. They stared, frozen, until panic gave way to stunned relief. Ethan had eliminated every threat without so much as nicking an innocent life. From a dark corner, Batman watched in silent awe. He had always prided himself on his speed and skill, but in that instant he felt profoundly humbled, unable even to shield the hostages before Ethan's bullets had already done their work. More importantly, he noticed that every criminal's head had blown apart almost simultaneously, an impossible combination of speed and precision. Batman recalled that the fastest revolver shot on record took just .0175 seconds to fire 2 rounds and pop 2 distant balloons, a feat demanding extraordinary skill and focus. Yet the figure before him, the so-called Terminator, far outstripped even that benchmark. In his hand was an automatic pistol, whose rate of fire and raw accuracy generally trailed behind a masterful revolver. And there was no careful aim or special technique involved. He simply raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The result was machine-perfect execution. Batman couldn't help but wonder, who was this Terminator, and how had he come by such inhuman abilities? Chapter 6 and 45. Continue the killing. Batman forced himself to ignore the mounting doubts in his mind. Now was not the time to wrestle with old questions. Only calm focus could see him through this life-and-death struggle and keep innocence safe. He inhaled deeply, centering his thoughts on the unfolding crisis. Across the courtyard stood the Terminator, Ethan, his pistol still smoking in a steady hand. His shots had been precise and unhesitating, each pull of the trigger executed with deadly efficiency. Yet Ethan's face remained impassive, as though the carnage unfolding around him were no more than routine paperwork. That unblinking coldness sent a chill through Batman's spine. He knew he couldn't simply watch a machine dispense justice on its own. Their opponents' ranks were far from beaten. Every corner of the compound teemed with armed lunatics and hardened criminals. This was a war fought not with grand proclamations, but with split-second decisions, each carrying the weight of life or death. Steeling his resolve, Batman braced himself for the next assault. It was time to rejoin the fray, and to remind these killers that humanity was not so easily extinguished. Ethan knew this battle was only just beginning. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, he was determined to push forward until the city was safe and the final victory was his. Above him, a TV news helicopter hovered, beaming every moment live to viewers across Gotham. At home, citizens gaped at their screens, awestruck by the sight of Batman and the Terminator standing side by side. The two heroes moved with precision and purpose, risking everything to protect the people below. "Unbelievable," one spectator shouted at her television. "They wiped out all those criminals in a single strike. So cool. All over the city, praise erupted. People felt proud and lucky to have such fearless champions watching over them. Ethan holstered his twin pistols and turned back to the hostages. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm and resolute. "Go on, get out of here." The words seemed almost casual, as if rescuing civilians from armed gunmen were part of his normal routine. Yet despite his reassurance, the hostages remained frozen, their eyes locked on Ethan's steely gaze. An undercurrent of fear still rippled through them. One of the security guards cleared his throat, voice trembling. "Sir, the corridor that leads to Arkham Asylum, it's blocked. We can't get out." Ethan's expression darkened. The real fight was only beginning. Arkham Asylum sat isolated on its own island, with only a handful of fixed entry and exit points. Now, every one of those passages was blocked by armed criminals, and the hostages inside had no hope of escape. Ethan frowned as he absorbed the news. He hadn't even considered this complication. Still, he trusted Batman. The Dark Knight always found a way out when the stakes were highest. "Everyone, move to that corridor and stay out of sight," Ethan instructed, in a steady voice. There was an icy detachment in his tone, yet it carried a reassuring authority. "Hunker down. I'll make sure no one bothers you again." Behind him, Batman's gloved hands danced across his comms unit as he mapped the situation in his mind. The longer the hostages remained inside, the greater the risk. A desperate, violent surge by the criminals could turn this standoff deadly. He opened a secure channel to Alfred at Wayne Manor. "Send a discreet fleet," he ordered. "We need to evacuate the hostages by sea." Moments later, Alfred deployed multiple vessels from the Wayne Group's private fleet, luxury yachts and small ships, each repainted and re-rigged to avoid prying eyes. Within the hour, they were converging on Arkham's shores, engines muffled, ready to ferry the terrified hostages to safety. Under Batman's direction, the hostages were shepherded onto yachts and smaller vessels in a calm, orderly procession. At the same time, Batman deployed teams to patrol the island's perimeter, ensuring no criminal element could slip in for a last-ditch attack. When the final boat pulled away, he allowed himself a single, steadying breath. He knew the real challenge lay ahead, facing every lunatic and thug Gotham had to offer, but he offered no quarter to fear. This was his mission, his responsibility. He would press on until the job was done. Ethan moved quietly along a moonlit path, every sense alert. Suddenly he felt a ripple of hostility surge through the darkness ahead. He froze, eyes sweeping back and forth like twin spotlights. In an instant, a hulking silhouette sprang from the underbrush. Ethan rolled sideways, narrowly evading the beast's savage lunge, and caught hold of its arm. Under the pale glow of the moon, the creature revealed its true form, a grotesquely muscular figure draped in armored scales, its jaw lined with razor-sharp teeth and talons glinting wetly. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary thug. This was Killer Croc, a new nightmare stalking the island's shadows. And now their paths had collided. Killer Croc's real name is Waylon Jones. Born with an extremely rare atavism disorder, he gradually developed razor-sharp teeth and nails, and over time, scales sprouted across his skin. As the transformation progressed, Waylon's face flattened into a broad snout, and his muscles swelled with inhuman strength, his body becoming more crocodilian with every passing year. Society's reaction was merciless. He endured endless taunts, cruel stares, and outright violence. Desperate to halt the changes, he would scrub his flesh raw in icy water every night, but each wash felt like 1,000 knives slicing into him. Eventually he gave up, accepting the scales that now encased him from head to toe, and the savage power that came with them. Tonight, that power nearly claimed a civilian. "Killer Croc, are you insane?" Ethan snarled, striding into the abandoned warehouse just in time to see Waylon lunge at an unarmed man. With a swift shoulder throw, Ethan slammed the mutant's hulking frame into the concrete floor. Dust exploded around them as Croc roared, struggling to rise on all fours. Before he could recover, Ethan was already on him, fingers tightening around a sleek pistol at his side. He pulled the trigger. The deafening reports echoed through the cavernous space as each bullet found its mark. Bang! Bang, bang, bang! The rounds struck Croc's reptilian hide with dull, sickening thuds. Waylon bellowed in pain, half crawling, half slinking backward. But for all his wounds, the creature remained dangerously alive, claws scrabbling at the ground, seeking a way to resist. Ethan kept his aim steady, determined to end the threat before anyone else got hurt. Ethan didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger again and again, sending specially designed rounds slamming into Killer Croc's supposedly indestructible hide. To Ethan's surprise, the bullets punched clean through, and Croc roared in agony as hot blood spurted from each wound, staining his armored scales a dark, angry red. But Ethan kept firing until the monstrous man-beast could no longer fight back. When the last shot rang out, Croc collapsed in a heap, limbs splayed and chest heaving in shallow, rattled gasps. Ethan holstered his pistol and stepped forward, peering down at the creature he had just crippled. Under ragged tears in the leathery skin, tiny nodules of fresh tissue pulsed, new flesh already knitting itself together. "The regeneration speed isn't half bad," Ethan murmured, voice low and cold, "but it's not fast enough." With that, he drew his combat knife in a single, fluid motion. Before Croc could muster another groan, Ethan drove the blade deep into his chest. The beast shuddered once, blood bubbling at the wound, and then went still. Some versions of Killer Croc cast him as an anti-hero, but more often, he's a villain. Tonight, Ethan made sure this one wouldn't be coming back. Chapter 6 and 46. Can Batman penetrate Arkham Asylum in one night? The carcass of Killer Croc lay slumped against the wall, a crimson pool spreading at his feet. Once a terror to both guards and inmates alike, he had met his end at the hands of Ethan, the so-called Terminator of Gotham City. His violent eyes, always brimming with fury, were now shuttered forever. With Croc's demise, the body count among Arkham's most notorious criminals was plummeting, and with each fallen villain, Gotham's dark heartbeat seemed to slow. From the blood-soaked cells of Arkham Asylum to the squalid alleyways of the Narrows, word spread of Ethan's merciless campaign. The same criminals who once stole sleep from every Gotham resident, twisting innocents' lives into nightmares, were being swept aside by a single, unstoppable force. By day, citizens whispered Ethan's name with reverence. By night, they prayed he would stop short of outright slaughter. His methods were ruthless, his code unyielding, yet the peace he enforced was the closest thing this city had seen to relief in decades. Parents tucked trembling children into bed without glancing over their shoulders. Shopkeepers locked their doors early, secure in the thought that Gotham's Terminator kept the streets clear of danger. Even the police, once helpless against the asylum's inmates, now watched with calculated caution as Ethan's crusade continued. Corruption and crime had long been woven into Gotham's fabric. To tear it out so completely felt as miraculous as it was terrifying. Still, a deep unease gnawed at the city's soul. With one man dispensing lethal judgment, who was left to check his wrath? Could anyone, perhaps even Batman himself, breach Arkham Asylum in a single night, armed only with batarangs and conviction, to face Ethan and restore order? As hope and apprehension warred in every heart, Gotham braced itself. A new era drew near. One promising freedom from madness, but at what cost? The people of Gotham are quietly torn. On one hand, they know the Terminator's ruthless purge of Arkham's worst criminals has saved countless lives. The horrors those inmates inflicted on the city defy description. Yet on the other hand, concerns about political correctness and human rights keep them from voicing approval. If they endorse the Terminator today, what hope do they have of escaping its judgment tomorrow? Who would stand up for them when the machine decides that they, too, must be eliminated? This fear has spread like a shadow through every neighborhood. Citizens understand what real justice looks like, but they recoil at its most absolute form. They want Gotham cleansed of its darkest evils, but not at the cost of their own freedom. Trapped between relief and dread, they hesitate to take any public stance. Their silence, born of uncertainty, hangs heavy in the city's corridors. Amid this moral crossroads stands Ethan. Unmoved by the turmoil around him, he follows a code of his own. To him, justice isn't a debate, it's a duty. While others wobble under the weight of what if, Ethan presses forward, certain that the road he's chosen is the only one worthy of walking. Ethan didn't care about anyone else's opinions or judgments, only his own actions and their results. In his mind, there was only one question. Could anyone else break into Arkham Asylum in a single night? Maybe Batman could, but Ethan was faster, more ruthless, and far less concerned with saving face. He moved down the dimly lit corridor and spotted a man huddled in the shadows. Without hesitation, Ethan fired once, and the man's skull exploded in a spray of blood. The shot rang through the empty hallway, each echo driving adrenaline into Ethan's veins. Before the reverberations died away, he squeezed the trigger again. This time, the bullet tore through the ceiling and found its mark in the groin of a criminal pacing above. The prisoner's scream, high-pitched and desperate, cut like a knife through the silence. Through his telepathic link, Ethan saw the truth of this man's twisted past. A predator who'd preyed on innocent boys and girls. There could be no mercy. Letting him bleed out in agony was the only fitting punishment. All through the asylum, the inmates had believed themselves in control, boldly taunting the legend they called the Terminator. But as each lunatic fell, one after another, they began to realize the mistake they'd made. They weren't the hunters that night. They were the hunted, and Ethan was already inside. Ethan, once written off as cornered prey, now stood like an undisputed monarch in their midst. The self-styled saviors who had convinced themselves they were the hunters found instead that they were the hunted. They hadn't surrounded a lone sheep in wolf's clothing. They'd encircled a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The truth lay bare. These zealots were no longer predators. They were terrified quarry. Ethan moved down the dimly lit corridor with deliberate slowness. Each footfall echoed like thunder in the silent passage, a steady reminder of his unstoppable power. Then, without warning, his boots sank into the stone floor, as though, unseen, the ground shuddered violently. Bricks and earth exploded outward in a cascade of debris that rattled the tunnel walls. It was as if a colossal boulder had been hurled into a still pond. Ripples of force radiated from the epicenter, shivering through every inch of the corridor. Ethan's brow furrowed. This was no ordinary tremor. "What the hell is happening?" he muttered, voice low but tense, eyes sweeping the shadows. Before he could take another step, a hulking figure rose from the shattered floor ahead, materializing in the swirling dust. Its outline was enormous, far larger than any man, looming in the wavering light. Ethan instinctively braced himself, every muscle coiled for whatever nightmare had just emerged. Ethan stepped into the dimly lit corridor and froze. Before him stood a creature of living clay, its body a swirling mosaic of earthen tones. It writhed on its own, as if each colored strand possessed a will of its own. He'd seen this monster before, Mudface, a shapeshifter whose form could soften into oozing sludge to seep through cracks or harden like iron to shrug off any attack. It could even mimic a person's features, making it impossible to know who or what would strike next. And kill it? Nearly unheard of. Smash it to bits, and the clay simply reformed within moments. Ethan allowed himself a crooked grin. Arkham's asylum is sure getting lively. At his words, Mudface let out a low, resonant roar that rolled down the corridor like a crashing wave. Pipes rattled overhead, and Ethan felt the echo thrum in his chest. Then, with terrifying speed, the creature's hulking fist swung down toward him, an impact that could have flattened a building. Calmly, Ethan raised a hand. His palm slapped against Mudface's clay-hard knuckles in a muffled thunderclap. The force shuddered through the hallway, dust raining from the ceiling as cracks snaked along the walls. Ethan stood his ground, eyes narrowed, ready for whatever the monster threw at him next. Mudface's eyes widened in shock. He clearly hadn't expected this unassuming human to shrug off such a fierce blow. Ethan let out a cold sneer and shoved with all his strength. Mudface's fist slammed backward, sending his body skidding several paces, yet instead of retreating, he only grew more savage. With a bestial roar, his form rippled and reshaped itself into a gigantic curved sickle that slashed toward Ethan in a blur of motion. Most would never see it coming, but Ethan didn't even flinch. He simply raised his forearm and met the strike head-on. The sickle bent and cracked like brittle pottery against the unyielding strength of his arm, shattering into fragments. Mudface howled in frustration, his weapon destroyed by something he'd assumed was fragile clay. Before Ethan could react further, Mudface's body shifted again, this time erupting into a massive, writhing tentacle that lunged forward to ensnare him. Chapter 647. Clown Ethan had seen it coming from the start. He lifted his foot deliberately, and just as the tentacle's tip hovered inches from his boot, he drove his heel down with full force. The entire chamber trembled with a deafening crack. the sound of bone and porcelain shattering beneath a hammer blow. The tentacle collapsed into a mound of clay-like fragments, scattered across the cold stone floor. "Enough playing around," Ethan muttered. "Time for something straightforward." He didn't call upon any showy technique, just a single unremarkable punch. To the untrained eye, it looked ordinary, but the power coiled within it was anything but. Ethan's fists clenched. The tendons in his forearms stood out like steel cables as he channeled every ounce of strength into that one blow. He drew his arm back, and his fist sliced through the air with a piercing whistle, like lightning cleaving the night sky. Ethan's punch connected with the mud-skinned creature in a burst of unleashed power. The impact hit like a bomb going off, forcing everyone in the corridor to stumble backward. A shockwave ripped through the air, whipping up dust and gravel into a swirling vortex. The creature itself was flung against the far wall with a thunderous crash, then collapsed into a quivering heap of clay on the stone floor. Every fragment of its ruined body lay scattered like lifeless statuettes, still, silent, utterly defeated. Yet Ethan knew better than to count it out. Much like Marvel's Sandman, this mud fiend could reconstitute itself so long as any of its clay particles remained intact. Over countless battles it had cheated death again and again. But this time, it had run headlong into Ethan, and now lay broken and beaten at his feet. Ethan slid a hand behind his belt, and as if by magic, pulled an object into view, raw thermite powder, an incendiary chemical capable of generating blistering heat. He knelt over the clay tiles lining the corridor floor and sifted the fine, silver-gray granules across their surfaces until each block wore a uniform sheen. Then, with the flick of a flint lighter, he sent a spark skittering across the thermite. In an instant, the powder erupted in a blinding flare. Light swept down the hallway, so intense it felt as though the walls themselves were ablaze. A searing wave of heat rolled over Ethan, making the air shimmer and his skin prickle. He shielded his eyes, but even through the blur of light, he watched the clay transform. Blocks that had been dull, dark brown moments before now glowed bright orange, their edges softening under the chemical onslaught. They hissed and bubbled, melting into viscous, molten shapes that writhed and twisted against the floor, as if alive and in torment. The flare of thermite and clay grew only more furious, cascading energy and light in an unstoppable chain reaction. Entranced, Ethan felt the raw power of the blaze coursing through the corridor, an invisible force he had unleashed, now wholly beyond his control. Ethan stood back as the thermite ignited in a blinding flash, unleashing a fierce chemical assault on the clay at his feet. This was no simple melting. It was an oxidation-reduction reaction in full swing. Aluminum from the thermite stripped oxygen from the clay, releasing an immense surge of heat that not only liquefied the earthen fragments, but superheated the surrounding air. Under that scorching blaze, lumps of clay began to bubble and hiss, collapsing into a viscous, tar-like sludge. Those same fragments that had once quivered with barely contained life, shaping themselves into a grotesque, tough, mud-faced mockery, now lay inert, their forms irretrievably dissolved. A pungent, acrid odor rose in thick waves, the unmistakable stench of thermite and clay reacting at extreme temperatures. It filled the corridor so completely that each breath burned his throat. Yet Ethan, unmoved by the choking fumes, watched the transformation with cold detachment. When the last embers of thermite glow faded and only sticky residue remained, he simply nodded. The clay had lost all trace of its former shape and vitality, nothing left but a slick, lifeless pool at his feet. Ethan watched as the clay-faced monstrosity finally withered under the onslaught of intense heat, its twisted features melting into a lifeless husk. He turned and retraced his steps along the corridor's scorched walls, the air heavy with heat waves and the acrid stench of burnt clay. Behind him, molten fragments oozed across the floor, cooling into jagged shards of hardened earth. Glancing at the wreckage, he noted the absence of Professor Pigface, Mr. Freeze, the Mad Hatter, and the ventriloquist. Had they already been apprehended and sent to Arkham Asylum, or were they still out there, skulking in the shadows? Before he could answer his own question, Ethan stepped into a chamber bathed in flickering fluorescent light. There, seated alone on a steel chair, was the Joker. The clown prince of crime lounged with unnerving composure, chalk-white skin smeared with grease paint, neon green hair slicked back and a grotesque scarlet grin frozen on his lips. Folding his hands across his chest, he regarded Ethan with cold, calculating eyes, a gaze that promised nothing but chaos. The Joker's unpredictable mind games were legendary, striking when his victims were most unprepared. And now, Ethan realized, he was squarely in the madman's sights. Ethan's gaze swept over the hostages, Arkham guards, police officers, medical personnel, and among them, the asylum's inmates, a mix of hardened criminals and the mentally unstable. Each one sat strapped with a bomb, the devices planted by Bane in what he'd promised would be enough to level the entire facility. Before him, the Joker stood perfectly calm, his signature grin in place, but devoid of the usual manic energy. He inspected Ethan as though he were observing a newly discovered species. "Hello, Terminator," the Joker said, coolly. Ethan said nothing. He calculated the situation in an instant, the number of explosives, their likely fail-safes, the viable paths for evacuation. Still, he didn't lower his guard. Joker tilted his head, as if musing aloud. "You know, I've been looking forward to this meeting. People can't stop talking about you, a man who once transcended every limit of science and strength and now has come back to play hero in our little Gotham." He chuckled softly. "Honestly, I thought you'd be boring." He stepped closer, the grin never fading. "You're reputed to be one of the most powerful beings on Earth, brilliant, unstoppable. Yet here you are, tying yourself to this madhouse, hanging around freaks like us. I have to admit, I wanted to see if the legends were true." The Joker paused, letting the tension build. "So, Terminator, tell me, what will you do when I give the word and these poor souls go up in smoke?" He unfolded his arms, his eyes glinting in the dim light. Tick-tock! Chapter 648, 3 Clowns. Ethan stepped into the dim chamber, each footfall echoing off the grimy walls. A single, flickering spotlight revealed a lone figure lounging in a tattered armchair, a clown. "Hello, Terminator," the clown drawled in a low, hoarse voice, the words dripping with amusement. He folded his arms over his chest, a twisted grin curving his painted lips. In his dark-rimmed eyes danced equal parts madness and anticipation. "Welcome to my little party." Ethan remained silent. He'd long since learned that in a place like this, silence could be its own weapon. The clown didn't mind. He thrived on the hush that fell over his carefully arranged stage, on the raw fear, surprise, or despair it provoked in his audience. "You know," he continued, rising slowly from the chair, "I've been looking forward to meeting you." He paced forward, letting his gaze linger on Ethan's unmoving figure. "You're the guardian of this world. I'm its destroyer. Our showdown, it'll be nothing short of spectacular." With deliberate calm, the clown stepped past Ethan and approached a second figure crouched in the shadows. He laid a hand on the man's hunched shoulder, as if waking a long-dormant creature. Instantly, the man's eyes snapped open, wild, unhinged. He let out a guttural scream and lurched to his feet, wires and detonators strapped tightly across his chest, rattling like chimes in a gale. The madman began to convulse in a jerky dance, cackling at the ceiling. With every twist and leap, the bombs on his vest shook violently, sending a terrible promise through the stale air. Ethan's muscles tensed. The performance had begun, and he knew the climax promised to be devastating. Ethan stood perfectly still, his gaze unwavering. Across from him, the clown grinned, each feature warped into something grotesque. "Look at my masterpiece," the clown exclaimed, sweeping a hand toward the terrified man at his feet. "I can awaken their madness and bend them to my will, and you? You'll only have the privilege of watching them crumble, one by one." His smile stretched wider, as if he'd already savored the grand finale playing out in his imagination. He thrived on the panic, the despair, that delicious electric rush. Yet Ethan showed no fear. He simply watched, calm and alert, taking in every twitch of the clown's painted face. The clown's eyes flickered with irritation, the spark of provocation sputtering out as though doused with ice water. He scowled, clearly frustrated that his theatrics weren't unraveling his opponent, but he didn't back down. Instead, he leaned forward, voice dripping with manic delight. "To be honest," he said, "I'm a little disappointed. It'd be so much more entertaining if you just shoot me right now. That way, the game would become far more thrilling." The Joker's voice crackled through the dimly lit chamber, seething with fury as though the world itself had wronged him. He stalked to the center of the room, arms outstretched, and began to rant, his words jagged and relentless. Each shout felt like it might rip the walls apart. His gestures were wild and exaggerated, as if he were performing some twisted one-man show, and the tangled mass of trigger wires hooked to his belt whipped around him like living snakes. Every reckless step he took sent the cables swinging, threatening to set off the hidden bombs at any moment. A cold dread crept through the onlookers, the metallic scent of sweat, skin prickling at the thought of their scalps exploding, hearts thundering in their chests. The oppressive tension in the room was almost unbearable. And yet, Ethan stood perfectly still. He watched the Joker with an unblinking, icy calm, as if the madman were nothing more than a clown pantomiming in the middle of a silent theater. Deep down, Ethan knew better than to be fooled by this spectacle. He understood the Joker wouldn't risk a careless misstep that blew them all to bits. He was far too calculating for outright self-destruction. The chaos and terror were all part of his grand design. So Ethan simply waited, his cool gaze never wavering, ready for the real game to begin. Ethan stood motionless as the Joker paced before him, amusement dancing in the killer's manic eyes. "You know," the Joker began, voice heavy with feigned regret, "I almost pulled the trigger on you the moment I saw you. I didn't want to waste my bullets on a Terminator trapped by the petty rules of our world." He shook his head. "But of course, you're still shackled by human concerns, and that's exactly why you bore me. I've got a far more interesting playmate waiting, our dear Bat." Suddenly, the Joker froze. He drew in a ragged breath and locked his gaze on Ethan, as if studying a rare work of art. A twisted smile crept across his pale face. "Ha!" he crowed. "You are one fascinating machine, Terminator. I'm looking forward to our next little game." The Joker's very soul is a twisted carnival of glee and madness. He revels in chaos and destruction, seeing the world as one vast playground, and himself as its most deranged player. Untethered by morality or reason, he follows only his darkest whims, striking without warning and leaving terror in his wake. To face him is to embrace unpredictability itself, and that, he finds, is the ultimate thrill. Joker's grin split his face as he shouted, "You worthless machine! You think you can save the world? You're dead wrong. The world doesn't need some cold, metal savior. It needs chaos and madness." With that, he whipped out a pistol and leveled it at Ethan. His eyes glittered with unhinged excitement, as if he might pull the trigger at any second. But Ethan didn't flinch. He simply stood his ground, expression unreadable, waiting for Joker's next move. A high, terrible laugh echoed through the room. Joker let the gun fall from his hand and shook his head, still chuckling. "No," he said, voice low and venomous. "This toy won't kill you, and honestly, killing you would be boring. I want you to watch everything you protect crumble. I want you to feel utterly powerless." Batman pressed his temple, frustration gnawing at him. A showdown between the clown prince of crime and a machine like Ethan was madness. And worse, Joker had no doubt wired every explosive in the place. Rescuing the hostages or subduing the Joker was out of the question now. The captives, criminals, deranged souls, terrified innocents, stood frozen, too scared to move. And lurking in the shadows, the Joker's gang prepared to turn this building into a tomb. Batman drew a deep breath. He'd have to find a way to stop Joker's bombs and protect Ethan all at once, before the true chaos began. They weren't afraid in the least. Instead, they gathered around their boss's performance, cheering and applauding with eager enthusiasm. Not once did they seem to worry that the bombs strapped to their bodies might detonate if they moved too vigorously. Ethan, for his part, paid no attention to the hostages or the explosives. All he wanted to know was who this masked clown could be. After all, clowns in Gotham almost always tortured people for sheer sadistic pleasure, rather than out of necessity. Sometimes, though, they reversed cause and effect, hurting complete strangers simply because the pain itself thrilled them. And these three Jokers before him were the perfect living proof of that perverse instinct. That, Ethan knew, was the Joker's trademark. He didn't just commit crimes, he orchestrated elaborate performances. He'd concoct a fiendish scheme, force Batman into the role of reluctant participant, and then control every moment at his own anarchic pace. While chaos engulfed the city, he'd sit back and savor the showdown, watching Gotham burn, all the while testing the Dark Knight's intellect and courage. Chapter 649, Disappointing Clown. The Joker's favorite leverage is taking hostages. It may strike some as crude, but against superpowered heroes it works every time. Threaten an innocent life, and even the most stalwart defender will pause. Yet the Joker doesn't stop there. When he's up against hardened criminals, he resorts to far more elaborate manipulations, turning them into willing puppets. To him, they're mere chess pieces on a board, each move calculated to exploit an opponent's every weakness. In Gotham's criminal circles, he swims with unmatched confidence, directing each scheme like a virtuoso conductor, ensuring every participant plays exactly to his script. But standing off to the side, Ethan can't help feeling underwhelmed. He's encountered countless self-styled masterminds, but this clown's master plan lacks real substance. For all the Joker's theatrics and posturing, Ethan sees through the showmanship and wonders why so many of his peers remain spellbound. Rather than a genius manipulator, this jester looks more like a disappointing sideshow, one Ethan has no intention of applauding. Ethan remembered Heath Ledger's Joker, unpredictable, mysterious, unforgettable. Jerome's Joker was a different breed of madness, a direct challenge to the world's order. Even Jared Leto's version, with its calculated extremes, felt more like a wild child painted in clown makeup, crazy for the sake of spectacle. But the man standing before him was merely Leto's shadow, frantic and excessive, yet utterly lacking the bone-deep cruelty and magnetic danger that made the originals so terrifying. This was pantomime, not menace. "As you wish," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, sounding hollow in the empty warehouse. He tightened his grip on the pistol. His knuckles went white. Each deliberate breath and every millimeter his finger moved toward the trigger spoke of absolute resolve. The Joker blinked, first with surprise, then with a curious gleam, as if he'd been counting on this very moment. He thrust out his chest, planted his hands firmly on his hips, and stood perfectly still, a brazen display of arrogance and fearlessness. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. Ethan's finger squeezed the trigger. Bang! The shot cracked through the air like thunder. In an instant, the bullet ripped from the muzzle and hurtled straight for the clown, bearing nothing but death in its wake. For a heartbeat, the clown wavered. His whole body trembled under the force of the blast. Yet the bullet never found its mark. With inhuman reflexes, he spun aside, the deadly round whining past him. A smug grin split his painted face. He straightened, eyes glinting with mockery. "You really thought I'd just stand there and take it?" He laughed, low and scornful. "You're nothing but a pawn shackled by rules. I'm the one who's truly free." Ethan's jaw tightened. He raised the pistol again, setting his sights on the clown's throat. This time, there would be no slip, no chance to dodge. Bang! The second shot rang out. The bullet struck true, tearing through flesh, blossoming into a spray of deep crimson. The clown's expression collapsed into shock and agony. Instinctively, he brought a trembling hand to his neck. Blood welled up between his fingers, painting them scarlet. He staggered back, eyes wide, as the realization of his wound registered. The painted smile on his face turned into a silent scream of pain. Ethan stood over him, breathing hard, the gun still steady in his grasp. The room fell deathly quiet, broken only by the clown's ragged gasps and the slow, dark pool spreading beneath him. For a moment, all that remained was the echo of the last shot, and the undeniable finality of what had just happened. Ethan's jaw hung open in a silent scream, but the bullet had shredded his throat. All that came out was a weak, gurgling groan. His body convulsed uncontrollably, his skin paling as beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. Each breath sounded like air bubbling through blood. His windpipe was mangled, torn apart from the inside. Pain seared through him, sharp and overwhelming. He clutched at his neck with both hands, but blood welled between his fingers, drenching his palms and dripping down his arms. His pulse hammered in his temples, and his breathing grew rapid and desperate, as though he were fighting his own failing body for each gasp of air. Vision blurred. Darkness crept in at the edges of his consciousness, threatening to drag him under. Bang! 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 Ethan squeezed the trigger again and again, the gun recoiling in his hand, until he was certain the clown would never rise. Everyone froze as the clown collapsed to the floor. Shock and confusion rippled through the crowd. He really was dead? And what about the bomb strapped to him? No sooner had he hit the ground than the fuse on his device sparked to life, and with it, every bomb on the hostages began their harsh, relentless countdown. Each tick felt like a hammer pounding against their hearts. "It's an old-fashioned timer," someone groaned. "Why can't it just go off all at once?" Ethan muttered, annoyance flickering in his eyes. Despite his complaint, there was nothing slow or careless about his movements. In a blur of motion, he darted past the panicked onlookers, hands flashing so quickly that only fleeting afterimages remained. With uncanny precision, he unhooked straps, clipped wires, and snipped fuses. One bomb after another fell harmlessly to the ground. Within seconds, every explosive was rendered inert. Yet Ethan didn't stop there. Even as relief washed over the crowd, his eyes were already scanning the room, ready for whatever danger lurked next. Ethan snatched up the unsecured bomb and dashed toward the cliff overlooking the sea beside Arkham Asylum. In a blur, he reached the edge, took a steadying breath, and hurled the device with all his might. The bomb traced a perfect arc through the air before plunging into the dark water below. Boom! A thunderous explosion tore across the surface, sending a towering column of spray skyward like a white chrysanthemum in bloom. The shockwave rippled outward, churning the water into tumultuous waves that crashed back against the shore. Had the bomb detonated anywhere closer, its fury could have leveled Arkham itself, but Ethan's superhuman strength had propelled it far enough offshore to spare the asylum. As the underwater blast dissipated, seismic ripples rolled through the sea, stirring up powerful currents that echoed the violence of the blast. In moments, the mist settled, leaving only the distant rumble of turbulent water to mark the bomb's destructive power. Chapter 6 and 50, End waves thundered across the sea, their crests foaming white under the force of the blast's shockwave. Ripples radiated outward, racing toward the shore and smashing into the reefs with thunderous roars. The air was thick with the acrid sting of gunpowder and a faint, sulphurous tang, the lingering residue of the explosion that quickened every heartbeat. Gradually, the shockwave subsided, and the water's surface stilled once more. Having neutralized the bomb threat, Ethan stepped back to his original post. His gaze settled on the fallen clown. At first glance, the body lay undisturbed, eerily calm amid the chaos. Yet Ethan's sharp eyes detected something off. He leaned closer, his vision cutting through illusion to reveal a frenzied, corrupting haze seeping from the corpse. Clown toxin, an invisible plague that devours everything in its path. It was then he understood the depth of the horror. This monstrous poison flowed in the Joker's blood. Ethan stood over the fallen Joker, recalling how easily the Joker's toxin could spread. A single touch, and an unsuspecting victim could be transformed into his next puppet. Unlike a zombie bite, this laughing plague worked in silence, turning people into its slaves without them ever noticing. He thought back to the comics' origin story of the Laughing Bat, how the hero who'd slain the Joker was unwittingly infected by a drop of the criminal's blood. But Ethan wasn't afraid. As a Kryptonian, he possessed extraordinary strength and an iron constitution. Before he'd fully grasped his own power, he might have hesitated, but now he was certain the toxin could not harm him. He extended his hand, channeling the full force of his heat vision into a focused beam of energy. In an instant, a blinding column of heat, hundreds of thousands of degrees, seared through the Joker's body. Flesh and toxin alike vaporized in an emerald-tinged flare. When the light subsided, all that remained was a wisp of green smoke, dissipating harmlessly into the air. With the Joker and his deadly toxin destroyed, Ethan allowed himself a quiet nod of satisfaction. The threat had been erased, once and for all. Shortly after Ethan put an end to the Joker's reign of terror, Bane slipped out of Arkham Asylum under the cover of night. For days he had been watching Ethan, the living legend some now called the Terminator, and he'd come to a chilling conclusion. Nobody could stand against him in a fair fight. The raw power Ethan displayed convinced Bane that direct confrontation was suicide. Instead, the masked bruiser chose to retreat and explore alliances with Gotham's criminal underworld. Ethan paid no mind to Bane's departure. His sole focus was on the hostages still trapped inside Arkham's crumbling walls. Moving like a one-man rescue team, he stormed through every corridor and cell block, tearing through locked doors with bone-shattering strength. Time and again, he guided terrified inmates to safety, refusing to leave a single soul behind. By nightfall, every hostage had been freed. Word of the feat spread through Gotham within hours, earning that day the name Arkham Liberation Day. Thanks to Ethan's actions, over 70% of the asylum's most violent criminals and deranged inmates were cleared out. Only those suffering from non-violent mental illnesses remained. Though the sight of these still troubled souls kept an undercurrent of unease alive, Arkham Asylum had never been more secure. And in the streets of Gotham, people finally dared to hope. Batman watched from the shadows atop an Arkham Asylum guard tower, each breath a reminder of his own powerlessness. Through his cowl's night vision lenses, he saw Ethan, nicknamed the Terminator by the underworld, moving with brutal precision through the corridors below. He knew Ethan's extreme methods were born of a desperate desire to protect Gotham. Yet as the city's guardian of justice, Batman could not stand by and let so much lethal force go unchecked. Throughout the night, Batman had scrambled to evacuate prisoners and restrain guards caught in the crossfire, working alongside GCPD units to minimize casualties. But Ethan's unstoppable momentum and single-minded resolve made any direct confrontation impossible. Batman dared not engage. He understood that a clash now would only deepen the bloodshed and risk turning himself into another victim. All he could do was watch, helpless, as Ethan delivered final judgment on the most dangerous inmates. When the last echo of gunfire died away, Ethan emerged into the asylum's courtyard, the moonlight glinting off his coat and the weapon strapped across his back. Batman stayed hunched in the tower, mind racing for a strategy that could stop Ethan without sacrificing his own mission or the lives still at stake. Down below, Selina Kyle, Catwoman, risen from the shadows at Ethan's back. Relief washed over her face the instant she saw him unharmed. She hurried forward, slipping an arm through his, as though she'd been clinging to that moment of safety all night long. Her dark eyes, usually so guarded, brimmed with gratitude and fear, finally laid to rest. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was so worried." Ethan gave her a small, weary nod. His expression was unreadable, the weight of every choice he'd made etched into the lines around his eyes. Selina squeezed his arm, anchoring herself to the only sure thing left in a night of chaos. And in that silent courtyard of Arkham Asylum, the two of them, hunter and protector, outlaw and hero, stood together, bracing for whatever dawn might bring. Whenever the news switched to a bulletin about Arkham Asylum, Selina's heart raced. Anxiety twisted in her chest, but Ethan had given her a strict order: stay put and don't act rashly. She knew he was right. Her skills weren't suited for the madness inside those walls and might only slow him down. So she swallowed her fear and remained on the sidelines. Besides, the police had cordoned off every road leading to Arkham, and Ethan's own assault on the Decepticon gunship had driven their aircraft away. Even if Selina had dared to run to his side, there was simply no way in. When Ethan finally reappeared, uninjured and resolute, relief and pride flooded her. In her eyes, he was the perfect hero, breezing through Arkham's horrors as though he were walking in a quiet hallway. His inhuman strength and unwavering courage made her heart ache. She wanted nothing more than to slip into his arms, become his woman, and stay by his side forever. Yet as she watched him stride past, that faint, stubborn gleam in his steel-blue eyes told her one thing: Ethan, the Terminator, had no room in his mission for love. He treated Catwoman like a cherished pet, softly brushing his fingers through her sleek fur, offering her comfort and warmth. Catwoman bristled at being coddled. She wasn't a kitten, but she couldn't deny the gentle kindness of his touch. After all, few could even dream of standing beside the Terminator, let alone Catwoman herself. Across the room, another woman watched Ethan with a fierce intensity, so overwhelmed she almost wished the floor would swallow her whole. Talia was sharp-witted, fiercely independent, and driven by ambition. She had followed Ethan's exploits in Arkham Asylum from the very start, marveling as he crushed every obstacle in his path. His performance there had been nothing short of unstoppable. In an era before Clark revealed himself as Superman, Ethan was widely regarded as the strongest man on Earth. In Talia's eyes burned both admiration and desire. She revered his courage and raw power, and longed, more than anything, to wield even a fraction of his strength. Chapter 651, Talia's New Plan. A fierce ambition burned within Talia. She wanted to become Ethan's companion and bear his child, carrying forward his extraordinary lineage. In her mind, a child sired by a man of his power and intellect would one day command the world. The vision drove her heart like wildfire, but one question tormented her more than any other. Who was Ethan, really? She knew at once that his origins were anything but ordinary. His strength and cunning exceeded those of mere mortals, yet every attempt to unravel his past led her into deeper fog. The Decepticon craft piloted by the Terminator, a fearsome, near-indestructible machine, had crashed twice under mysterious circumstances. Each time, however, it had reassembled itself as if reborn, leaving no scrap of debris for forensic study. No physical evidence, no salvageable components, just the eerie memory of its arrival and departure. Worse still, every appearance of the Terminator was as fleeting as a ghost's. Talia's trackers picked up only static. There was never a trail to follow, never a lair to besiege. No matter how many resources she threw at the problem, Ethan's secret remained buried behind impenetrable walls. And so, driven by desire and frustration in equal measure, Talia resolved to craft a new strategy, one that would finally bring her face to face with the man whose very genes she craved. Chapter X. The Only Way Out. Talia's fists clenched as she stared down into the alleyway's shadows. Every lead had gone cold, and the mystery felt impossibly tangled. She spun toward her teammates, frustration burning in her chest. "They're nothing but lunatics and petty crooks," she snapped. "They can't touch me." Ethan, formerly known as Luther, offered a calm smile as he addressed Catwoman. His posture was poised, almost model-like, but his eyes betrayed a sharper edge. "Bane reckons he's hidden away," he said quietly. "But I've already tracked his every move." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I'm holding off on taking him down. A hero needs his villains. Without formidable opponents, we're just vigilantes chasing ghosts. Arkham Asylum is overflowing with bodies of those who underestimated us." He flexed his gloved hand. "Anyone bold enough to show themselves here will face the full force of the Terminator's justice. No mercy, no mistakes. And those still skulking in the dark? They'll be prime targets in my next operation." At GCPD headquarters, Commissioner James Gordon stared at the bulletin in stunned silence. Joker declared dead. The words seemed impossible. The Joker, the city's most insidious menace, erased from the game. For decades, Gordon had counted on the Mad Clown's chaotic brilliance to define Gotham's very darkness. Now he wondered what new horrors might emerge in the shadow left behind. Commissioner Gordon sat alone in his dimly lit office, stunned. He'd just learned that the Joker, the very embodiment of chaos in Gotham, was dead. Worse still, there was no body. According to terrified hostages, a single strike from a Terminator had reduced him to ash in seconds. Gordon closed his eyes, recalling the Joker's twisted grin, his unpredictable violence. He'd never once believed the clown prince of crime could truly be killed. After all, Batman himself treated the Joker with the utmost caution. Now, with no remains to examine, Gordon felt a strange mix of relief and regret. Gotham owed a debt of gratitude for the threat that was no more, but they'd also lost the chance to study a criminal mind unlike any other. If, by some miracle, they ever found what was left of the Joker, Gordon vowed he'd seal the ashes in steel and cremate them himself, just to be certain the city would never suffer his madness again. Meanwhile, Ethan had already moved on to the next phase of his mission. He'd taken Catwoman under his wing, pushing her past her limits and refining her talents. Night after night, the two of them prowled Gotham's rooftops, striking at crime before it could spread. Together, they became a new kind of justice, swift, relentless, and utterly determined to protect the city from whatever darkness dared to rise next. Ethan was well aware that Bane, Batman, Deathstroke, and the others never took their eyes off him, studying his every move for the slightest advantage. He didn't mind. He knew they wouldn't strike without absolute certainty. After all, the night before he'd single-handedly quelled the riot at Arkham Asylum, disarming the inmates and toppling their twisted psychological experiments before dawn. By sunrise, Batman had scrapped his Terminator countermeasure armor too, conceding that his once formidable suit was as delicate as paper against Ethan's methods. Now, Bruce Wayne was holed up in the Batcave, sketching out Armor 3, determined to devise a way to contain Ethan. Yet he understood this was merely the opening move. As long as Ethan's strength and intellect continued to evolve, each new armor would demand still greater ingenuity, Marks 4, V, and beyond. Talia al Ghul learned firsthand how difficult it was to approach Ethan unobserved. He granted no unguarded moments. Of course, Ethan could always activate his divine perspective, peering through shadows to uncover every hidden plan. He found that game tedious, though. There were far more entertaining diversions waiting for him, challenges that truly merited his attention. Talia had agonized over every detail of her plan, scripting it with meticulous care. She couldn't shake the nagging doubt. Did Ethan, the legendary Terminator, recognize her from that fleeting moment when he'd rescued the beauty? The rescue had unfolded too quickly to be certain. To eliminate any risk, she resolved to assume an entirely new identity, one he could never link to their last encounter. Harnessing her considerable sway within the Assassin's League, Talia set her scheme in motion. Despite her father, the underworld boss Lei Xiaogu, dismissing her as unfit to inherit his legacy simply because she was a woman, Talia's authority among the League's operatives was unquestioned. With a single word, she rallied a cadre of fiercely loyal assassins, briefing them to play hostile forces in her staged confrontation. When Ethan arrived on the scene, intent on dismantling a criminal cell, he walked straight into Talia's trap. Suddenly, the air erupted with gunfire. Automatic weapons spat out bullets in relentless volleys, and grenades exploded around him like torrential raindrops. Unaware that this was anything but an ordinary gang takedown, Ethan pressed forward into the ambush Talia had so carefully orchestrated. Ethan strode into the firefight as if it were nothing more than a routine training exercise. Clad in reinforced armor, his every step was measured and unhurried. Bullets whizzed past, grenades erupted at his feet, but he showed no sign of fear. With effortless grace, he bent or twisted around incoming rounds, then leveled his weapon to blast stray grenades out of the air. Not a single scratch marred his armor. Watching from the sidelines, Talia found herself breathless. Up close, Ethan's strength and speed were even more astonishing than rumor had suggested. She admired the unflappable calm in his eyes, the way he sized up each new threat and moved through the hail of fire as though it were a gentle rain. Her heart raced, torn between awe and something deeper, an urgent desire to prove her worth and earn a place by his side. Determined not to remain a mere spectator, Talia sprang into action. She gripped a fresh grenade in each hand, her muscles coiled like springs. With uncanny precision, she hurled them into the enemy ranks. Explosions rocked the battlefield, and suddenly, Ethan was no longer alone. Side by side, they would transform this minor skirmish into their first shared victory. Chapter 6 and 52, fighting side-by-side explosions thundered in rapid succession, flames leaping skyward and turning the battlefield into a blazing inferno. Under that furious onslaught, the enemy's return fire faltered. Ethan stood amid the smoking ruins, eyes alight with resolve as he took in the chaos before him. Through the haze of dust and smoke, a lone figure darted forward, swift, precise, and unhesitating. Clad in a sleek black leather jacket that hugged every curve, she moved with the lithe grace of a seasoned warrior. Ethan found his gaze drifting to her silhouette before he registered the ferocity with which she fired her rifle. He shook his head, bewildered by the contrast. Here was a deadly combatant, yet her choice of attire felt almost incongruous on a war-torn field. Still, as she vaulted over shattered concrete and spun to cover her squadmates, it was clear this was no mere show of style. Her movements carried the quiet confidence of a trained ninja, and she wielded that high-powered weapon with uncanny skill. Ethan couldn't help a wry thought. She certainly understands the power of a uniform. Across the ruined street, the woman paused for a heartbeat and spotted Ethan's lingering stare. A brief, triumphant smile curved her lips beneath her tactical goggles. Talia knew exactly the effect she had on allies and foes alike. Then she raised her rifle and, side by side with Ethan, plunged back into the fray. She told herself that if Catwoman could pull it off, there was no reason she couldn't. So she'd ingratiated herself with the Terminator, now known to her as Ethan, fought at his side, and steadily earned his wary trust. She knew her skin-tight suit had caught his attention. Men, after all, were easily dazzled by a striking silhouette. Determined to build on that advantage, she inhaled deeply and darted into the fray like a whirlwind. Each time her gun barked, a slug found its mark and another enemy tumbled to the ground. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful, each shot timed perfectly, each step part of the careful plan she'd mapped out in her mind. She wanted Ethan to see that she wasn't just a striking figure in leather, she was a fierce warrior in her own right. Looking ahead, she resolved to prove her worth again and again, shoulder to shoulder with him. Only by standing firm in battle could she hope to break through Ethan's steely principles and show him her true heart. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Ethan trusted few, and none so quickly, but she was determined to earn his faith, one firefight at a time. Talia told herself that if she treated Ethan with genuine sincerity and proved her worth through her actions, she could someday soften his heart. So when the next wave of enemies rushed in, she darted into battle with renewed determination. Her feet barely whispered against the ground as she weaved through the chaos, her shots precise and unerring. Each well-placed bolt slowed the enemy's advance, even if the overall tide of battle barely shifted. She was simply glad to play her part. Ethan watched from a few paces away, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He recognized the careful choreography in every feint and flourish, the performance of a ninja determined to impress, but rather than expose her act, he found himself quietly enjoying it. Then, in the middle of a fierce exchange, a blade flashed too close. Talia cried out as it slashed across her side, and she went down hard, gasping for air. Without hesitation, Ethan sprang forward and intercepted the next attacker's strike with his forearm, taking the blow himself. The enemy staggered back, giving Talia a precious moment to recover her breath. "Are you all right?" Ethan knelt beside her, voice tense. His hand hovered above her tunic, searching for the wound. Talia gritted her teeth against the pain, fighting the urge to look weak. She tried to push herself up, but a white-hot spike of agony stopped her. She stared at Ethan, voice hushed but firm. "I can't move." "I'm fine, thank you," Talia insisted, though blood seeped through her clot. Ethan didn't hesitate. With a fierce glare that ignited his eyes, he swept in front of her, deflecting every assassin's strike. He knew these killers weren't ordinary, they were bound to the Lazarus pool, fated to return from death. So each time he felled one, he followed with ruthless precision, his burning gaze seared through armor and flesh, reducing limbs and bones to ash. Not one would slip through his grasp and revive. Talia watched, horrified, as her own men fell and were abandoned in ruin. She had never pictured Ethan capable of such savagery, yet in the heat of battle, his resolve was absolute. The last assassin collapsed in a hiss of steam. Silence reclaimed the night. Gently, Ethan supported Talia's weight and guided her to a sheltered alcove among the ruins. He laid her down on a tattered blanket, his vigilance unbroken as he scanned the shadows beyond. Pulling his cloak tight, he crouched beside her. "You need to rest now," he said, his voice low but steady. Talia met his gaze, her racing heart steadied by the calm in his eyes. Whatever nightmares lay ahead, she knew she wasn't facing them alone. Talia paused just outside the abandoned warehouse, her heart steady. She knew she'd closed the distance to Ethan, and now her next challenge was to prove she could be trusted. Stepping into the dim light, she squared her shoulders and spoke with quiet confidence. "Ethan, or should I say Terminator, I'm Talia, a ninja, an assassin." Ethan lifted his head at the sound of her voice. He didn't answer immediately, but his sharp eyes took her in, sizing her up with relentless focus. At last he drawled, "A female ninja?" Talia let a faint smile play across her lips. "Yes, I train in dozens of weapons, blades, shurikens, even hand-to-hand combat." In an instant, she brought a dagger to life in her hand. The steel caught the pale moonlight, tracing a cold arc through the air that spoke of her skill. Ethan's expression softened just a fraction. He was impressed. He leaned forward. "Why have you come here?" Talia inhaled, tensing every muscle. Then, with a voice as steady as steel, she replied, "I'm here to find a partner, or an ally, strong enough to help me stop the criminals who plague Gotham City." Her gaze locked onto Ethan's. Determination burned in her eyes as she waited for his answer. Talia steeled herself, knowing full well how difficult it would be to win Ethan over. Still, she trusted that her honesty and determination would speak louder than any deception. When she finished speaking, Ethan was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice low and resolute. "I'll give you one chance," he said, "but you must earn my trust. Prove that you're a true ally." A surge of relief and excitement welled up in Talia's chest. She had cleared the first hurdle. Now she had to back her words with action. With that in mind, she discarded her original plan to drug him. Ethan's superhuman physiology and a metabolism vastly more powerful than a normal person's would render any ordinary sedative useless. And resorting to heavy tranquilizers meant for wild animals was a gamble she couldn't afford. If she botched it, she'd only anger him further. Better, she decided, to rely on sincerity and skill rather than risky tricks. Chapter 653, Female Ninja and Wildcat. Talia's heart raced, each pulse reminding her just how precarious her situation was. Though she'd just struck a tentative alliance with Ethan, she knew better than to expose her true identity as the Terminator. Patience and stealth were her allies now. She'd wait quietly for the perfect moment. Watching Ethan's broad shoulders vanish down the corridor, a swirl of conflicting emotions rose in her chest. Their partnership was a marriage of convenience, a subtle game of mutual exploitation. If he ever discovered her real motives, every one of her plans would unravel. The cavernous warehouse swallowed the sound of her ragged breathing, amplifying her tension in its silent hollows. Leaning on bruised limbs, Talia made her way toward the hidden refuge she'd prepared in advance. This decaying structure on the outskirts of Gotham City was all but deserted, its maze of fractured walls and scattered debris ideal for evading pursuit. With broken pallets, warped girders, and stray machinery, she'd constructed a snug alcove just big enough for her to lie low, patch her wounds, and wait for what came next. Talia crouched in the dim light of her safe house, unpacking the last of her supplies. First went the daily essentials, food rations, water canteens, a compact medical kit, and then her custom weapons and surveillance gear. She inspected every piece with meticulous care, scanning corners, checking seams and locks. The Terminator was relentless, cunning beyond measure, and even the smallest oversight could prove fatal. Once she was satisfied that nothing was missing, she turned her attention to severing all links with the Assassin's League. One by one, she deleted her encrypted messages, smashed hard drives, and burned any document that might betray her identity. Every shard of evidence had to vanish. Only by covering her tracks completely could she hope to lie low until the right moment to strike. Her heart pulsed with resolve. She ran through her mental checklist. Escape routes, fallback positions, communication backups. This mission would test her limits, but she was ready. Leaning back, she let a quiet smile cross her lips. "Terminator," she whispered into the darkness, "you'll belong to me soon." A fierce light flickered in her eyes as she pictured that final confrontation, the instant she'd finally corner the machine. Unbeknownst to her, though, she wasn't alone. From a shadowed alcove across the room, Ethan watched her every move. He knew her routines, her strengths, even the drafts of her plans, and he had been waiting for this moment. Ethan crept through the abandoned warehouse, his eyes fixed on Talia's concealed alcove. He didn't intervene or confront her. Instead, he stayed hidden, curious to see how she would handle the next trial. From his vantage point, he watched her movements with keen interest. Talia had clearly planned every detail. Rows of common handguns were neatly laid out on an old crate, each one scratched and mismatched, as if bought hastily from different black market dealers. Her tactical pouches and holsters looked equally improvised. Yet nestled among these crude weapons were true masterpieces of assassin's craft, razor-sharp shuriken and short swords, their steel polished to a mirror finish. These were the only pieces in her arsenal that spoke of professional quality. She arranged the ninja weapons front and center, almost defiantly, as though daring anyone to question her skills. The display was bold, a perfect reflection of the female ninja persona she'd chosen. Ethan couldn't help but admire her thoroughness. Every choice she'd made, from the makeshift firearms to the high-precision blades, spoke volumes about her training and her determination to fight alone in Gotham's underbelly. That night, beneath dark, sweeping clouds and bitter winds, Ethan slipped away to meet Selina Kyle. With Catwoman at his side, he was ready to set their plan in motion. Ethan and Catwoman slipped into one of Gotham's most notorious neighborhoods, where criminal gangs prowled the alleyways. Moving in near silence, they readied themselves for a surprise strike. At the agreed hour, a soft rustle announced Talia's arrival. She appeared in a sleek ninja ensemble, her top fashioned from stretch fabric that clung to every contour, allowing nimble, unhindered movement, while her loose black pants gave her the freedom to spring and pivot as needed. At her waist hung a slender ninja toe, its blade shimmering with a cold, dangerous light. A dark cloth masked the lower half of her face, revealing only her eyes, sharp, unwavering, and bright as twin stars in the night. Her long hair flowed freely behind her, lending her an air of mystery and quiet elegance. As she stepped before Ethan and Catwoman, her presence cleaved through the darkness like a sudden flash of moonlight. With a slight nod to Ethan, she melted back into the shadows, poised and ready for their next move. "Terminator, I'm here." As Talia slipped into view, Catwoman, Selina, instantly bristled, her posture tightening like a cat guarding a fresh kill. Emerald eyes narrowed as she took in Talia's sleek ninja attire. Jealousy curled in her chest. A new rival had arrived, threatening the bond she shared with Ethan. In an instant, she bared her claws and let loose her suspicion. "Terminator, who is she and why is she here?" Ethan met Selina's glare with a calm smile. "Easy, Selina. She's our new ally, here to help us purge Gotham of its evil. With her on our side, we'll be that much stronger." Selina's tension eased just a fraction, though her lips still curved in a reluctant frown. "We've always worked well together, the two of us. Do we really need someone else?" Ethan shook his head gently. "I'd love to say no, but the villains in Gotham aren't just growing in number. They've become smarter, more dangerous. We need every advantage we can get. Including the female ninja in our ranks will only strengthen the plan," Ethan declared. Catwoman bristled, but kept her silence. She knew Ethan was stubborn. Once he formed an opinion, it was nearly impossible to change his mind. Still, she recognized the simple truth. Every ally made them stronger. Fighting the urge to show her distrust, she forced herself to remain calm, though her guard stayed firmly up. Across the room, Talia observed the exchange with a cool detachment. Catwoman's resentment didn't ruffle her, nor did Ethan's praise impress her. She sat quietly, an unreadable smile playing at her lips. After all, Talia had already arranged for Catwoman to walk into a trap, an assignment carefully designed to remove her as an obstacle to Talia's own alliance with the Terminator. In Talia's eyes, Catwoman was nothing more than a loose end, a wild cat whose fate mattered little. Chapter 654, New Situation. Talia moved in perfect step behind the Terminator and Catwoman as they wove through Gotham's shadowy streets. Together, the three of them formed a makeshift Justice League, united in their determination to stem the city's swelling tide of evil. Ever the agile and meticulous fighter, Talia welcomed every challenge, but even she was surprised by the brazenness of the foreign gangs now encroaching on Gotham's turf. Ethan glanced up at the haze-choked sky and frowned. Why would these criminals target Gotham? By most accounts, the city's security measures were tighter than New York's, and opportunities here reportedly outnumbered those anywhere else. Yet the air was so thick with smog it felt like breathing through a damp cloth. Gotham City, the notorious crime capital of the DC universe, draped itself in darkness night after night. Even at midday, architects and city planners seemed intent on keeping the streets shrouded in gloom, as if the sun had abandoned the city altogether. Towering skyscrapers rose like silent tombstones under a charcoal sky, monuments to Gotham's unending sorrow. And tonight, that sorrow felt closer than ever. Industry and traffic spew an astonishing volume of exhaust, while Gotham's green spaces remain woefully scarce. As a result, the city's air quality has plummeted. Residents endure acrid fumes and a perpetual haze. Much like industrial-era London, Gotham relentlessly pursued profits and rapid urban expansion, but turned a blind eye to environmental protection and sustainable development. Under the sway of its four ancient families and the powerful street gangs they bankroll, the city never achieved the health-focused modernization of other great metropolises. Chemical waste floods the atmosphere, draping the sky in a permanent gray that weighs heavily on everyone, even at midday. Towering structures of brick, stone, and concrete dominate the skyline. Their high heat capacity and thermal conductivity create an intense urban heat island effect. Temperatures in the city center climb well above those at the outskirts, compounding Gotham's environmental crisis. Gotham City, modeled on New York, suffers from an extreme urban heat island effect. Day after day, the combination of trapped heat and smog leaves the metropolis shrouded in a dull, oppressive haze. The region's weak East Coast monsoons are powerless to sweep the toxic gases away, and with each passing year, Gotham's air grows fouler. Even the Wayne family, Bruce, his allies, and close friends, choose to live on the suburban fringes rather than in the city center. Their decision speaks volumes about how dire Gotham's pollution has become. As the city's masked guardian, Batman is intimately aware of every dark corner and hidden injustice in Gotham, but he can do little to uproot these systemic environmental problems. Instead, he maintains a careful distance, finding refuge in the relative calm and cleaner air of the outskirts. It was against this bleak backdrop that Pamela Eiley, known to the world as Poison Ivy, rose to prominence. A passionate and extreme environmentalist, Ivy is driven by a singular goal: to force Gotham to breathe again. She dreams of blue skies and verdant streets, and she's convinced that only radical action can save the city from suffocating under its own pollution. Whether her methods will bring the salvation she seeks, or plunge Gotham into chaos, remains to be seen. Though her methods had been extreme, Ethan could understand her motives. After all, who wouldn't want a moment of fresh air in this godforsaken place? But tonight, the streets were swarming with thugs and petty criminals, as if the city had vomited up every last lowlife in its depths. Ethan shook his head, wondering if they'd all lost their minds. A mere street gang posed little threat to him and his team. With a curt gesture, Ethan summoned Talia and Selina from the shadows, and the two women drifted forward like wraiths. Talia, a deadly ninja of the Assassin's League, moved with the lithe grace of a stalking panther. Every strike was precise, every footfall silent. At her side, Selina, once an ordinary cat burglar, had blossomed into a formidable killer under Ethan's tutelage. Her style lacked Talia's elegance, but in its place was raw, predatory power. The gangsters didn't stand a chance. Clueless and uncoordinated, they fumbled at their weapons as if performing a clumsy street theater. Within heartbeats, Talia's razor-sharp blades had disarmed two of them, and Selina's brutal efficiency left the rest scrambling for escape. Ethan watched impassively as the last thug hit the asphalt. In this dark corner of the city, only a few moments of decisive skill were enough to turn the tide. The fight was over almost as soon as it began, clean and quick, just the way he liked it. Blood pooled around their fallen bodies as the gangsters dropped one by one, staining the pavement crimson. Not a single drop marred Ethan's suit or that of his team, proof of the gulf between their strength and the thugs they'd just dispatched. Such overwhelming power explained why they'd swept through Gotham's underworld without breaking a sweat. Before long, every gossip column and late-night radio show in the city was buzzing. The Terminator had added another female aide to his ranks. Clad in the dark, lithe attire of a ninja, she moved with silent grace, earning her the simple moniker, the Ninja. Gotham folk understood the reference immediately, a deadly, enigmatic shadow in human form. Ethan himself dared to joke. Had he been less discreet, he'd have mockingly called her a Timonin, but he abandoned the idea at once. The term was too risque and carried the wrong connotations for a crime-fighting ally. Meanwhile, the rumor mill churned out envy and admiration in equal measure. After all, Ethan's roster already included Catwoman herself, Selina Kyle, Gotham's most beguiling burglar, now ostensibly on his side. And now this new ninja. What man in the city wouldn't envy him? But they didn't know the truth. Talia, the woman behind the ninja's mask, found herself unable to bridge the gap between them. Ethan's will was absolute, his mind as unyielding as steel. His resolve shone so brightly, so terrifyingly, that it repelled ordinary mortals. Instead of driving her away, though, it ignited Talia's fascination. The more she witnessed of Ethan's iron determination, the more she hungered to understand him, and perhaps one day earn a place by his side. Talia was more determined than ever to defy the odds, to best the formidable Terminator herself. Ethan knew exactly what she had in mind, so he couldn't resist teasing her every chance he got, feigning indifference whenever she pressed him for support. Meanwhile, a massive cargo plane lumbered down the runway at Gotham City Airport. its polished fuselage gleaming in the early morning light. In the control tower, air traffic controllers dutifully logged takeoff data, unaware that this routine departure would soon plunge the city into crisis. Moments after liftoff, a cacophony of alarms erupted in the cockpit. The pilots exchanged worried glances as an unsettling tension filled the cabin. Then, through the crackling radio, came a terse, unambiguous order: divert course immediately to Blackgate Prison. Though baffled by the unexpected directive, the crew had no choice but to comply. Back in Gotham, word of the diversion spread quickly through the ranks of city officials. Blackgate Prison housed some of the city's most dangerous inmates. Any incident there could spell disaster for the entire metropolis. Faces grew grave as everyone braced for what was about to unfold. I can certainly help. However, I'll need the full text of the chapter, all the machine-translated content, in order to craft a coherent, polished rewrite with Ethan as your male protagonist. Please paste the entire chapter, and I'll get started right away. Chapter 655, Blackgate Prison night had fallen, but the floodlights inside Blackgate Prison burned as brightly as midday. Guards patrolled their posts with the same disciplined vigilance they'd shown all day, unaware that a covert assault was about to unfold. Without warning, a thunderous roar shattered the stillness. High above the outer wall, the rear hatch of a massive transport plane swung open, and a bitter wind stung the faces of the on-duty guards. Carried in it was the acrid odor of gunpowder and oil. They froze, staring upward as the plane hovered into position, its belly revealing not cargo but rows of sleek black minigun barrels. "It's a gunship," barked Sergeant Ramos, his voice cracking the night air. No sooner had he shouted than a torrent of tracer rounds descended. The first bursts hammered into the perimeter fence, then ripped through the reinforced concrete of the watchtower, sending chips of stone flying like deadly shrapnel. Panic erupted among the guards. They scattered in every direction, desperately seeking cover. But the gunship's withering fire was relentless. Each salvo obliterated makeshift barricades and sent bullets ricocheting off the walls with metallic shrieks. Sparks flew where rounds struck steel doors, and the ground shuddered beneath the ceaseless pounding. In less than 30 seconds, Blackgate's outer defenses were little more than scars in the concrete. Amidst the chaos, the guards hunkered down, faces pressed against the cold stone, praying for the storm of lead to pass. But above them, the gunship's guns kept barking, determined to tear this fortress of security wide open. Blood sprayed across the courtyard as two unlucky guards crumpled to the ground. "Damn it, we need backup!" Sergeant Morales barked into his radio, his voice cracking with fear. Dust and sweat streaked his face as he fumbled with his baton, a useless token of defense against the onslaught. The night air had ignited from the blast of artillery, thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder and burning concrete. One by one, the outer cell blocks collapsed under relentless shelling. Chunks of brick and shattered stone flew through the air, clouds of dust choking the makeshift barricades. Flames licked the ruins, turning the darkness into a hellish orange glare. In a shattered alcove, Corporal Jenkins huddled behind a scorched pillar, knees shaking. "It's a gunship. God, they've stripped down a transport plane and rigged it for combat," he stammered into his radio. Static and harsh bursts of white noise answered him, no reinforcements in sight. Panic spread through the guard ranks like wildfire. Men sprinted for cover, diving behind overturned tables, now smashing through doors, anywhere to escape the unrelenting strafing runs. But the converted gunship swooped back again, its twin 50 caliber guns blazing without mercy. Beneath the roar of engines and the thunder of shells, the prison was falling apart, and hope was fast slipping through their fingers. Ethan pressed himself against the chipped concrete wall of the guard tower, sweat stinging his eyes as the gunship above Blackgate Prison unleashed a terrifying barrage. Tracers of gunfire sliced through the acrid smoke, turning the yard below into a hellish flood of sparks and flame. Each deafening explosion buckled beams, sent shards of metal and concrete crashing to the ground, and set entire cell blocks alight. Amid the thunderous roar, the high-risk inmates seized their chance. Shackles clattered as they slipped free, scrambling over scorched debris to snatch up discarded rifles and pistols. Soon, echoing shouts and desperate cries rose from every corridor. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched hardened criminals, faces twisted with fury and fear, surge toward the guards he'd trained with for years. "Take cover," he bellowed, diving behind an overturned table as rounds splintered wood all around him. He fired back through a crack in the wall, each shot a grim reminder of how quickly order had collapsed. Beyond the yard's perimeter, flames clawed at the outer fence, the heat so intense that even the reinforced gates had begun to warp. Some prisoners didn't hesitate. They sprinted into the inferno, determined to vanish into the night rather than be trapped beneath Black Gate's burning ruins. Others, more obstinate, stayed to clash blade to barrel, engaging the guards in fierce, close-quarters combat. Steel met steel. Gunshots rang out in rapid succession, punctuated by the prisoners' howls and the guards' desperate yells. Ethan reloaded on instinct, adrenaline surging through him. Overhead, the gunship banked for another pass, its engines whining like a vengeful storm. With each strafing run, the prison crumbled further, and Ethan realized that by dawn, no one left alive here would ever be the same. Ethan's world went up in flames. Thick, acrid smoke curled through the corridors of Blackgate Prison, suffocating everyone who tried to breathe. A desperate firefight raged between the guards and the inmates. Gunshots echoed off stone walls, punctuated by anguished cries as each side fought tooth and nail for survival. Then the ground trembled. A dull roar came from above, ripping open the once quiet night sky. Ethan flinched as a gunship swooped low, its underbelly hunched toward the compound. He caught the metallic gleam of a bomb as it let go, an ominous shape hurtling downward like an angry meteor. The sharp tang of gunpowder stung Ethan's nostrils. Somewhere in the distance, a worn timer counted down. 3, 2, 1. His own heartbeat thundered in his ears, merging with the frantic pulse of battle into a single, urgent drum. Time slowed as the bomb struck the prison's heart. Then came the blast, a deafening, earth-shaking roar that ripped buildings apart. Walls collapsed in tongues of fire. A rolling gust of superheated air slammed into Ethan, pinning him against the rubble. Dust and shattered brick rained down in a blinding cloud. Guards and prisoners alike were hurled to the ground. Men and women lay sprawled among the wreckage, their faces etched with horror and disbelief. Over the cacophony of cracking timbers and distant cries, Ethan forced himself to rise, choking on smoke. The prison he'd known was gone, replaced by a seething inferno that offered no mercy, no escape, and only one question: how many would survive the night? Flames and collapsing concrete offered no sanctuary. Prisoners bolted through the smoking wreckage, only to be caught in the shockwave of the blast and thrown into the inferno. Just when all hope seemed lost, Ethan plunged from the transport plane, landing hard on the prison's shattered courtyard. In the seconds that followed, more operatives in matte black combat gear touched down around him. Armed and battle-ready, they formed up with military precision, unfazed by the roaring flames and falling debris. Ethan glanced skyward at the smoldering transport before zeroing in on the high-risk inmates still trapped amid the ruins. His team fanned out in a tight formation, each agent's movements fluid and exact. With calm, steely eyes, they swept through the devastation, ignoring the screams and towering infernos. Within moments, they'd carved out a secure perimeter and set up a makeshift command post atop the broken guard tower. Under Ethan's concise orders, the most dangerous prisoners were rounded up and organized into disciplined groups. Guards who tried to intervene were quickly pinned back by the agent's superior training and overwhelming firepower. As the breakout operation fell into a grim rhythm, agents guiding inmates through cleared paths, prisoners keeping pace without chaos, Ethan surveyed the scene. In the heart of the prison's collapse, order was being forged from the ashes. The night air was rent by thunderous blasts as masked operatives swept through Blackgate's defenses. The prison guards' rifles, hastily manned and poorly aimed, did nothing to stop them. Under precise, unflinching commands, the agents forced open the cell blocks with explosives, and the inmates poured out. One after another, Gotham's most dangerous criminals streamed into the sea, our tired. Smuggled weapons glinted in the firelight, feral grins split their faces. In that moment of chaos, they tasted freedom for the first time in years. Their cheers and blood-curdling shouts merged with the roar of collapsing stone and the crackle of gunfire, forming a savage symphony beneath the black sky. Blackgate, once a grim fortress of iron and concrete, had become a hellscape. Flames raced from wing to wing, hungrily devouring cell blocks and guard towers. Pillars of smoke billowed upward, stained orange by the fires below. Under relentless shelling, walls crumbled, sending clouds of dust rolling over shattered walkways. Inside the wreckage, the prison staff lay scattered and defeated. They sat dazed on the scorched ground, uniforms torn, eyes hollow with despair. Every familiar corridor and clanking gate they had known so well had been reduced to rubble and ash. Far away in Gotham City, senior officials finally answered the prison's distress call. But it was already too late. Reinforcements could not be mustered in time. By the time they mobilized, Blackgate had been swallowed by fire and ruin, and its worst predators were loose in the night. Ethan and the others paced anxiously, desperate for any news that might prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. But as reports streamed in of one hardened criminal after another breaking free, the mood grew increasingly somber. Batman and the Terminator exchanged tense, alarmed glances, both stunned by the sheer audacity and scale of the prison assault. Chapter 656, Don't Call Me Terminator. Ethan's team sprang into action with the precision of expert hunters, methodically scouring the ruins for clues to the mastermind behind the assault. They all understood the stakes. This was far more than a prison break. It was a direct strike on one of Gotham City's most critical institutions, and by extension, a threat to the entire city. Blackgate Prison wasn't merely a facility for detaining criminals. It was a vital safeguard of public order. Perched on a rocky island roughly 3 miles offshore, its 50-meter-high walls rose like a fortress above the freezing sea, flanked by jagged reefs that served as a natural barrier to any escape. Now, those towering walls lay in ruins. Collapsed masonry choked the courtyard, and the massive iron gates had been bent and twisted as though made of paper. The entire structure resembled a war zone, charred, shattered, and all but razed to the ground. Standing amid the debris, Ethan surveyed the devastation. The bitter salt spray from the surrounding waters still hung in the air, mingled with dust and acrid smoke. Every fractured stone and buckled beam spoke of tremendous force, a force unleashed deliberately, with the singular purpose of shattering Gotham's last line of defense. He glanced at his lieutenants, their faces set and determined. They would reconstruct the sequence of events piece by piece, track down every lead, and unmask whoever dared to challenge the city's security. Because in Gotham, no threat could be allowed to stand, and no prison, however remote, was truly invulnerable. Ethan squared his shoulders, steeled his resolve, and stepped forward into the wreckage. There would be answers, and whoever called him Terminator would soon learn that he answered to a much higher authority. Justice. Chapter 7. The Hell of Arkham. The walls of Arkham Maximum Security Prison rose like an impenetrable fortress, built to withstand any assault. Inside, the corridors echoed with despair. Dim lights flickered over steel bars, and each cell felt like a personal inferno. This was the ultimate lockup for Gotham's most ruthless criminals, men and women guilty of horrors most citizens could scarcely imagine. Here, every escape attempt was met with brutal punishment, and the weight of hopelessness hung in the air like a thick fog. But tonight, that uneasy peace shattered. An orchestrated attack, its architect still unknown, breached Arkham's defenses. Blasts ruptured the outer wall, alarms wailed, and guards raced to hold the line. In the chaos, dozens of hardened inmates seized their chance. They flooded out of their cells, armed with stolen keys, citing weapons and burning with rage. Some slipped into the city's shadows. Others brazenly forced their way through the streets. Within minutes, Gotham was thrown into panic as these fugitives scattered, each determined to sow terror in their own bloody way. Inside the prison yard, the cost was devastating. Many guards fought valiantly to stem the tide. Countless men and women fell protecting those iron gates. Their sacrifice bought precious minutes, but it couldn't stop the breakout. High above the turmoil, Batman watched from a gargoyle's perch. The Dark Knight's eyes swept over the fleeing prisoners, noting every face, every weapon, every escape route. Gotham needed him now more than ever. As the sirens wailed and the city descended into chaos, he vanished into the night, determined to hunt down each escaped criminal and restore order, no matter the personal cost. Ethan understood all too well how dangerous and vengeful the escapees were. If they began sowing chaos across Gotham City, the consequences would be nothing short of disastrous. Already, panic and anxiety had settled over the populace like a dark cloud. Whispers of violence stoked everyone's worst fears. Residents worried for their own safety and that of their families, haunted by the thought that the city's fragile order could collapse at any moment. Once bustling streets now lay eerily empty. Storefronts stood dark, and pedestrians hurried along sidewalks with tense, watchful eyes, each afraid they might become the next target. In response to the breakout, the police had wasted no time. Patrols doubled, roadblocks sprang up at key intersections, and every precinct was on high alert. Yet despite their efforts, the fugitives remained frustratingly elusive. The escapees were too many and too skilled, slipping into Gotham's shadowy corners with uncanny ease. Standard surveillance and checkpoints simply weren't enough to corner them. As Ethan reviewed the latest reports, he realized that without fresh intelligence, solid leads on where these criminals had disappeared to, the city's defenses would never suffice. To regain the initiative and protect Gotham, they desperately needed more clues, and they needed them fast. Meanwhile, beneath the surface of Gotham City's streets, the criminal underworld was in uproar. The recent mass escape from Arkham had not only overwhelmed the police, it had thrown long-standing power structures into chaos. Established crime lords found themselves besieged by an influx of unpredictable, dangerous new elements. Fearing for their territories and profits, many panicked at the prospect of losing everything they'd built. Yet some of Gotham's more astute kingpins recognized an opportunity in the turmoil. They realized that, if they were to preserve their own empires, they would have to ally themselves with law enforcement against these upstarts. In secret meetings held in dimly lit backrooms, they offered the police the intelligence and leads they'd carefully gathered, maps of hidden safe houses, tip-offs on smuggled weapons caches, and the identities of newly liberated inmates. As the city's various factions mobilized, one figure stood at the forefront of the fight. Batman, Gotham's silent guardian. Drawing on both his legendary detective skills and his fearsome reputation, he forged a working partnership with Commissioner Gordon and the GCPD. Together, they coordinated raids, shared surveillance data, and refined their strategies night after night. Their single aim, to bring every last escaped criminal back behind bars, restore order to the streets, and ensure that the chaos unleashed by this jailbreak would be but a brief, dark chapter in Gotham's history. The underworld of Gotham was in upheaval. Old rivalries were dissolving as rival gangs set aside their grudges, forging uneasy alliances to confront shared threats. The city descended into unprecedented chaos. High above the streets, Ethan stood motionless on the head of a Gothic gargoyle, the very pinnacle of Gotham's skyline. Its stone eyes were frozen in eternal vigilance, while Ethan's own gaze, dark and fathomless, seemed to pierce every shadow below. He wore form-fitting black tights and draped over his shoulders a vast cloak that billowed like a living thing. In the still night air, bereft of even a breeze, it fluttered silently, as though woven from strands of midnight itself. Below him, Gotham writhed in darkness and disorder. A dense layer of storm clouds blotted out the moon, leaving the city's true face concealed beneath an inky veil. From his lofty perch, Ethan watched the turmoil ripple outward, determined to strike when the moment was right. Even the moonlight, strained through thick clouds, offered only a pale, hazy glow, enough to trace the city's silhouette, but never its details. In that half-light, Gotham resembled a horror film set, bristling with unease. Flickering fires and inky shadows along the streets wove grotesque patterns, a stark testament to the city's perpetual tug-of-war between chaos and order. Perched atop a gargoyle statue, Ethan surveyed the turmoil below. Every distant gunshot and explosion reverberated through the night like a macabre symphony, yet Ethan's face remained unreadable, as if each blast were exactly what he'd expected. Then the staccato of frantic footsteps cut through the roar. Ethan turned his head, his sharp eyes sweeping the dark avenue. There, a black-clad gang, faces hidden behind masks, weapons gleaming, had erupted into a violent standoff with the police, the two sides locked in a savage, unrelenting clash. They moved with lightning-quick agility, every strike landing with pinpoint accuracy. Chapter 657, Black Cloak. The riot police flooded the streets, but their lines buckled under the ferocious onslaught of the black-cloaked assailants. Like a ship caught in a violent storm, the force wavered, each formation on the verge of collapse. Perched on a rain-slick gargoyle high above the chaos, Ethan observed the melee with unblinking intensity. His eyes burned like twin beacons in the night. "Death," Talia's voice crackled in his earpiece. She crouched on a lower ledge, clad in a form-fitting leather jacket, both pistols at the ready. Determination hardened her features. She was itching to dive into the fray. Ethan shook his head, his expression stoic. "Not Terminator," he corrected softly. "Call me Death." At that moment, Catwoman dropped down beside him with the grace of a shadow. Selina's black catsuit clung to her agile frame as she scanned the unfolding battle below, her eyes glittering with calculated anticipation. Every movement betrayed her readiness to exploit the slightest weakness. Ethan turned his gaze back to the chaos. His voice was low, measured, absolute. "Hold your positions. Wait for my signal." In that command lay the steel of his resolve. The name Death wasn't just a code name. It was his vow. No mercy for evil, no hesitation in judgment. And when the moment came, the world would know exactly why he chose it. Talia and Catwoman exchanged uneasy glances, both silently questioning why Ethan had dropped his old code name at such a critical moment. Neither dared voice the thought out loud. The city was on the brink of collapse, and every second counted. In truth, Ethan had grown tired of Terminator. Watching the Black Marshal reinvent himself time and again had inspired him. Why cling to one identity when you could forge a new legend? Now he peered down at the chaos below. The streets, packed with police, were in disarray under the insurgents' relentless assault. "Now," he commanded, his voice calm yet unyielding, as though it carried an invisible force. Within a heartbeat, Ethan sprang off the rooftop. Like a streak of dark lightning, he dove into the melee. His landing was cat-sharp and seamless, as if he'd rehearsed this very descent 1,000 times, ready to turn the tide of battle. Ethan vaulted into the air, his black cape fanning out behind him like a massive banner in the night breeze. It became his wings, carrying him fluidly between skyscrapers as though he were one of the city's shadows. Close behind, Talia and Catwoman followed, their lithe forms tracing graceful arcs against the moonless sky, elven wraiths racing toward the chaos below. The moment Ethan descended, the battlefield fell eerily silent. Gunfire, distant explosions, and frantic shouts all dimmed to a hollow murmur, as if the very air held its breath. The militants, caught mid-scramble, felt an oppressive weight settle over them. Heads snapped upward at the sight of a solitary figure cloaked in black, dropping from the heavens. It was like witnessing the god of death make landfall, and a wave of paralyzing dread rippled through their ranks. In that instant, Ethan's presence reshaped the fray, imposing a cold, precise order on the pandemonium. He touched down with cat-like grace and, without pausing, surged into the heart of the enemy line, striking the militants with unerring speed and purpose. Ethan moved with terrifying speed, as if he'd shattered every human limit. Each stride carried him several meters forward, leaving the militants no time to react. His black cloak seemed alive, billowing and swirling with each of his movements. At a flick of his wrist, the fabric stiffened into razor-sharp blades. He waved his arm, and those inky knives sliced through armor and flesh as effortlessly as a blade through silk. Blood spurted, screams of agony echoed, and bodies dropped in an instant. With each graceful motion, a gust of wind blasted outward, as though he meant to tear the world itself apart. The militants struck by his cloak were torn asunder by some invisible force, their limbs flung apart, organs and blood bathing the ground in a horrifying tableau. Everyone who witnessed it felt their hearts seize in terror. The few fighters who still clung to their weapons froze mid-attack, staring wide-eyed at the black-clad figure before them. In Ethan's presence, they saw no man but a harbinger of death, and their hope died with that realization. Even Talia and Selina, standing on the edge of the carnage, felt their blood run cold. They had never seen power like this, and they both understood, in that instant, that nothing would ever be the same. They'd never seen Ethan's power laid bare before, and they wondered why he'd swapped his outfit yet again. Now they understood. He was revealing a brand new ability. First, he'd been clad in high-tech armor as the Transcendent. Then, as the Terminator, his body had become nigh invulnerable. And now, humbly draped in a simple black cloak as the Death God, he was showing them what that guise truly meant. Talia stared in awe. From the moment Ethan slipped the cloak over his shoulders, it had rippled with an almost sentient energy, transforming itself into an unmatched magical weapon. Like a living armory, it shifted at his will, taking on whatever form he needed to overcome any obstacle. Concentrating for only a heartbeat, Ethan willed the cloak into the shape of a gleaming longsword. The blade's edge shimmered with an icy light, promising to cleave through flesh and steel alike. With a single, silent motion, he swept the sword through the air, its arc a silver blur, and drove it straight into the chest of the nearest militant. Before the others could grasp what was happening, their comrade crumpled to the ground, crimson pooling beneath him. Without hesitation, Ethan's cloak rippled once more, readying itself for his next command. Ethan's black cloak shifted again, each transformation accompanied by a violent rush of power and blinding speed. It seemed to anticipate his every thought, reshaping itself into whatever weapon best suited the moment. Before him, the militia fighters crumpled like lambs to the slaughter, helpless against his onslaught. With a sharp flick of his wrist, the cloak solidified into dozens of razor-sharp blades. They spun around Ethan like a living black storm, cutting through shields and armor as if they were paper. The enemy scattered, trying desperately to evade the unrelenting whirlwind of steel, but no one escaped those spectral edges. Each time a fighter thought he'd found a gap, another blade appeared to seal his fate. Then Ethan drew a deep breath and commanded the cloak once more. In an instant, it coalesced into a colossal battle axe, its haft as tall as he was, its double blades wreathed in a sucking darkness that seemed eager to consume life itself. Ethan planted both feet firmly on the cracked earth, wrapped his hands around the cold handle, and brought the axe down with terrifying force. The very air shuddered at the blow, and a shockwave rippled outward, flattening the nearest ranks of militia in a single earth-splitting strike. As dust and debris settled, Ethan stood alone at the battlefield's center, the black axe fading back into the folds of his cloak. Not a soul dared challenge him again. Chapter 658, Symbol of Death. Ethan's enormous axe gleamed with a steely, merciless light as he lifted it overhead. Then, with a thunderous crash, the blade came down. Boom! The shockwave ripped through the ground, sending up a choking cloud of dust. Fissures spider-webbed across the earth, yawning open like some monstrous maw craving destruction. Militants who had been celebrating their imminent victory froze in terror as the cracks snaked toward them. They attempted to flee, but the blast of air that followed the axe strike formed an invisible barrier, pinning them in place. A few unlucky men were swept off their feet by the wave and vanished into the dust, their fates unknown. Those still standing scrambled, hands shaking as they fumbled for their rifles and grenades. But Ethan did not pause. He planted himself firmly, using the momentum of his swing to brace against the ground he had just shattered. The militants, rallying from their shock, unleashed a hail of gunfire and explosives. Bullets whined past him, and grenades blossomed in sudden, fiery blooms. Metal shards and debris whirled like deadly confetti in the air. Ethan tightened his grip on the axe's handle and set his jaw. The air reeked of cordite and fear, but he stood unflinching. This massacre was far from over, and neither was he. Ethan remained unnervingly calm under fire. With a casual sweep of his black cloak, the fabric took on a life of its own, solidifying into an impenetrable barrier around him. Trenchant machine gun rounds and the concussive blasts of grenades pounded against this living bulwark, gouging deep craters into its surface as if daring it to fall. Yet the cloak held firm, its dark surface unyielding. Behind his living shield, Ethan watched the militants with cold, detached eyes. Their shouts and desperate cries echoed against the barrier, but he showed no hint of sympathy or fear, only the quiet composure of a man observing a performance in which he had no part. As minutes crawled by, the attackers' onslaught faltered. Their ammunition dwindled, their volleys grew ragged, and panic spread through their ranks. Then, as their last round sputtered into silence, Ethan struck. In the span of a heartbeat, his body blurred with supernatural speed, too swift for anyone to track. He unfurled his cloak once more, and this time it sprang to life as a massive, razor-sharp blade. A frigid gleam ran along its edge as he swung, cleaving through the frenzy of militants before they could even comprehend what was happening. The force of that single blow was beyond imagination, and in its wake, the battlefield fell eerily still. Where chaos had reigned, there remained only the echo of Ethan's victory, and the whispering rustle of his cloak, returning to its mundane shape at his side. Ethan's great blade cut through the air with such force, it seemed to rend the very wind itself, unleashing a high-pitched scream. The militants, once reveling in the rush of killing, suddenly felt an unstoppable power bearing down on them. They tried to dodge, but it was far too late. Their cries of terror echoed across the field as men were cleaved in two, their bodies tracing bloody arcs through the sky before crashing to the earth. Dark red pooled at their feet, turning the ground into a gruesome tableau. Those who hadn't yet fallen watched in horror, their hearts pounding with fear and despair. Panic set in, and they scattered in every direction, desperate to flee this slaughter. But Ethan gave them no quarter. He swept his black cloak aside and struck again, moving through the crowd like a bolt of darkness. With each swing of his blade, another soldier crumpled into a growing sea of blood. In mere minutes, the once arrogant militants lay silenced and broken, wiped out by Ethan alone. Talia and Catwoman stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. Who would have thought Ethan could single-handedly take down so many militants with nothing but that black cloak? What kind of artifact could shift form on a moment's notice, becoming blades or shields as needed, and wield such devastating power? Talia's pulse raced with envy and desire. If only she could possess a cloak like that. With it, she imagined herself slicing through every obstacle in her path, crowned invincible. For someone as ambitious as Talia, the thought was utterly intoxicating. Catwoman's reaction was more pragmatic. Instinctively, she recognized the cloak's immense value. A sly smile tugged at her lips as the urge to claim it for herself surged. She had never pulled off a heist on this scale, but how could she resist the challenge? Studying their fascinated faces one last time, Ethan neatly folded the cloak and slung it over his shoulder. "Let's go," he said coolly. "This is settled. Leave it to the police now." With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Talia and Catwoman to nurse their rivalrous ambitions. Ethan was just about to step away when his black cloak seemed to stir of its own accord, snaking around Talia and Catwoman's waists. Before they could even register what was happening, the cloak lifted them off the ground. "Ah!" Talia and Catwoman cried in unison as they felt themselves go weightless. Dizziness washed over them at first, but it quickly gave way to exhilaration and curiosity. Peering down, they watched the city shrink beneath them while the sky opened up around them. Ethan didn't pause to take their protests into account. With a deliberate sweep of his arm, his cloak blossomed two enormous, draconic wings. A rush of wind filled the air, whipping Talia's and Catwoman's hair around their faces as the trio soared higher and higher. After a few breathtaking moments, Ethan guided them toward a hidden ledge far above the streets. There, he folded the cloak neatly around himself and gently set Talia and Catwoman back on solid ground. Ethan looked at them and nodded. "All right, we're here." Only when the danger had truly passed did Talia and Catwoman finally unclench their grasp. They turned to Ethan, awe and curiosity shining in their eyes. They'd just been through something extraordinary, and it was all because of Ethan and that mysterious black cloak. "Terminator, the god of death, what exactly is that cloak of yours? How can it shift into so many different forms?" Thalia asked, unable to hold back her questions. Even if Ethan chose to remain silent, her curiosity wouldn't let her rest. Ethan met her gaze calmly. "It's a symbol of death," he said simply. Chapter 659, Epic Enhancement of Bane. Talia and Catwoman exchanged glances when Ethan casually mentioned the symbol of the Grim Reaper. Neither of them understood what he meant, and when Ethan refused to elaborate, they reluctantly dropped the subject. That very night, a new wave of terror washed over Gotham. Bodies began appearing in alleys and abandoned warehouses, each scene more gruesome than the last. Whispers spread through the city's underbelly of a shadowy killer, once called the Terminator, who now wielded a strange, ever-shifting cloak. This wasn't an ordinary cape. It seemed imbued with some arcane power, able to transform its form and function at the wearer's will. To reflect this eerie new ability, the Terminator rechristened himself Death. From slums to penthouses, everyone in Gotham's darker corners spoke of Death's latest name and the horrors that followed every time he emerged. His identity, and even the name he used, changed as unpredictably as his magical cloak. And with each alteration came yet another bloodletting that threatened to overwhelm the city. Batman watched the news with mounting frustration. Every mission he and Deathstroke had planned over the last weeks was unraveling. The unpredictable capabilities of Death's enchanted cloak rendered their strategies obsolete, introducing variables they had no way to anticipate. Across town, Bane brooded over the same reports. He had counted on a period of uneasy calm to strengthen himself and test his new enhancements. Instead, this relentless killer was plunging Gotham into fresh chaos, undermining Bane's plans and further straining the city's defenses. As Death prepared to unleash his next onslaught, Gotham stood on the brink once more. And in the shadows, Batman, Deathstroke, and Bane each readied themselves for a confrontation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about this grim Reaper figure who stalked their city's nights. Ethan had believed he could carve out a place in Gotham on his own terms. In practice, the city proved far more brutal than he ever imagined. Desperate for allies against the relentless Terminator, he reached into Gotham's criminal underworld, forming uneasy pacts with gang leaders, street bosses, and every shadowy faction willing to lend their strength. Yet none of these groups held as much power, or inspired as much fear, as the Court of Owls. Hidden beneath the city's streets and corridors, the Court of Owls had steered Gotham's darkest dealings for generations. Their pact, sealed in secrecy, gave them control over every illicit trade from black market arms to illicit surveillance. Those who defied their will were said to be torn apart by the taloned killers they called Talons. Not even the storied Wayne family dared to cross them. When Bane first uncovered proof that the court was more than a ghost story, he realized he'd stepped into a vortex far beyond his reckoning. Now, the court's leaders watched the Terminator's campaign of brutal justice with growing alarm. His unrelenting crusade was dismantling their carefully maintained networks, driving Gotham's balance toward order, and cutting deeply into the profits and influence they'd nurtured for centuries. If Gotham's underworld continued to crumble, so too would the court's dominion. Their objective was clear: remove the Terminator and restore the shadows that had long cloaked their power. They had no interest in Gotham's salvation, only its perpetual rot. To them, the city thrived on evil, madness, and corruption, teeming with crime and opportunity for those bold enough to seize it. Change and light were anathema. What the Court of Owls craved was darkness. So, to restore what they called Gotham's true balance, they turned to Bane. They believed no one could match his strength. And they even dared to hope he might destroy the mysterious force known as the Terminator, or annihilate it entirely. To guarantee his victory, the Owls granted Bane the legendary Dionysus Factor, a miraculous serum of immortality that heals any wound in moments. Gotham's Tory was already stained by this potent elixir. In a darker era, the court had infused the Dionysus Factor into the bones of their Talons, transforming them into inexorable killers. Under Owl control, those undying assassins executed every command without mercy, striking terror into the hearts of any who opposed the court's will. Now, with Bane reborn and unstoppable, the Owls prepared to reshape Gotham once more in shadows and blood. After months of brutal training, the Court of Owls' talons have grown deadlier than any assassin in the League of Shadows, swiftly emerging as an unstoppable force in Gotham City. Yet the Owls' true purpose for recruiting Bane runs far deeper than simply bolstering their ranks. They intend to remake him into their ultimate living weapon, a talon so powerful they can unleash him at their whim. His intellect and scientific prowess make him the perfect candidate to master the enigmatic Dionysus Factor, they believe, forging an even sharper blade in their clandestine arsenal. But Bane is no ordinary experiment. Before Titan Venom ravaged his mind and stripped him of his prodigious talents, he stood at the very pinnacle of biochemical research. He was the genius who discovered and perfected Titan Venom itself. Now, even after acquiring the Dionysus Factor, Bane refuses to become a test subject without caution. He knows all too well the compound's hidden variables and potential side effects, and he will not risk unleashing uncontrollable destruction through hasty self-injection. Ethan decided to begin his investigation with the most enigmatic element he'd ever encountered, the Dionysus factor. He moved into the Court of Owls' subterranean laboratory and set up his equipment. Every morning, he calibrated spectrometers, adjusted high-resolution microscopes, and ran one bioassay after another, all in an effort to probe the factor's structure, composition, and reactivity. But the Dionysus factor refused to cooperate. In its native state, it appeared as a silvery green liquid metal, eerily stable, yet impossible to detect when dormant. Legends say it arrived on Earth in the planet's infancy. Ancient cultures wove it into their myths, crediting it with the power to heal wounds, mend broken bone, even rejuvenate withering plant life. Ethan's tests confirmed a kernel of truth. When living tissue was injured, the factor would spring to life, mobilizing to repair damage at a molecular level. Outside of those moments, though, it vanished into stealth, undetectable by any instrument he could devise. Day after day, Ethan watched his data dry up. Spectral lines that appeared one trial simply didn't show up the next. Samples that had glowed with regenerative energy 1 hour lay inert the next. For conventional science, built on repeatable observation and controlled experiment, this was a nightmare. He found himself torn between frustration and fascination. This unobservable substance was both the ultimate puzzle and, perhaps, the greatest discovery in human history. Yet for every new question he answered, 2 more seemed to arise. How did the factor know when to activate? What mechanisms governed its perfect vanishing act? And most urgently, could humanity ever harness its power without risking something far worse? Ethan pinned fresh charts on the lab wall and stared at them in the dim light. He'd come for answers, and so far had only found more mysteries. But he would not abandon this quest. The Dionysus factor might be elusive, but Ethan was determined to shine a light on its secrets, whatever it took. Ethan ran through every experiment he could imagine to force the Dionysus factor to reveal itself. Every test ended in frustration. He was more confused than ever, unsure how to proceed. Yet, he hadn't failed utterly. He'd discovered something crucial. By itself, Titan venom wears off quickly and strains his body, but when he combined it with the Dionysus factor, the effects not only lasted far longer, but intensified. That breakthrough lit a spark of hope in him. In the story's original arc, Ethan had craved stability. After all, without his venom tubes, even Batman would have dismantled him. So he'd been content with steady strength, never chasing raw, unchecked power. But everything changed when he witnessed the Terminator's might firsthand. Now he knew he needed every edge he could find. Titan venom and the Dionysus factor, working together, he whispered to himself, eyes alight. He also believed the Court of Owls was powerless to stop him. Their version of the Dionysus factor was a degraded strain, further tainted with amber gold, and hardly more than a curiosity. Even that diluted sample proved enough to supercharge his body. With this combination, Ethan was certain he could finally overcome his old weaknesses and break through every limit he'd known. Sure, please go ahead and paste the full chapter, or the portion you'd like revised, and I'll transform it into a polished, idiomatic English version with the main character renamed to Ethan. Chapter 660, Super Bane. Deep in the underground laboratory's shadows, Bane stood over a stainless steel workbench, utterly focused on the delicate procedure before him. Clad in a fully sealed protective suit, gloves scrubbed to surgical purity, goggles locked in place, he prepared to combine 2 of the most volatile substances known to science, the Dionysus factor and Titan venom. One misstep here would mean disaster. On the bench lay an array of precision instruments and reagent bottles, each meticulously labeled with hazard warnings. A soft green glow from overhead lamps threw dancing reflections across the glassware. Bane reached for a slender dropper, his gloved fingers barely trembling as he drew a single, crystalline drop from the vial marked Dionysus factor. He held his breath, steadying himself against the faint hum of ventilation pipes and distant machinery. Leaning close, he guided the dropper tip over the open test tube of thick, inky Titan venom. The tiniest lapse in concentration could trigger a chain reaction too fierce to control. With deliberate care, he released the droplet. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a searing flash of light burst from the tube, so brilliantly white it was impossible to meet with naked eyes. A wave of heat rippled outward as the mixture ignited in a silent electric blaze. Shadows writhed across the walls, and Bane's heart pounded in his chest. He rocked back on his heels, blinked against the afterimage of that blinding flare, and refused to look away. Slowly, the light dimmed, leaving a swirling pool of molten gold where smoke curled in silver tendrils. The lab returned to its low hum, punctuated only by the hiss of cooling gases. Bane exhaled, wiped condensation from his goggles, and allowed a tight smile to spread across his face. The fusion was perfect, and the world would soon learn the true meaning of Super Bane. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut and raised his hands to shield his face from the searing light. A blast of hot air hissed out of the test tube, as if eager to ignite the entire laboratory. When the glare finally subsided, he opened his eyes to witness the liquid inside slowly spinning into a tiny vortex, the unmistakable sign that the two chemicals were reacting. His heart pounding, Ethan adjusted the settings on his equipment and leaned in, watching every change. He tweaked the reagent ratios, carefully monitored the temperature gauge, and kept a close eye on the pressure readings. Each adjustment demanded absolute precision. Even the smallest error could collapse the entire experiment. Minute by minute, the solution turned cloudy and its color deepened to an almost mystical shade. Ethan felt a latent power stirring within the glass, as if the mixture itself were coming alive. His pulse quickened and his breath grew shallow, like a distant voice calling out to him from the depths of his soul. But despite every precaution, he knew the process was far from guaranteed. One wrong move now could undo everything he'd worked for. As the reaction intensified, the liquid in the test tube flickered between violent boiling and sudden crystallization, a clear sign that the two compounds were rejecting each other, even as they tried to merge. Ethan had anticipated this instability. Calmly, he added a few precise drops of stabilizer. Immediately, the frothing subsided, the solid fragments dissolved, and the solution stilled into a smooth, radiant substance, unlike anything he had seen before. He'd spent countless tense days and sleepless nights working toward this moment. Now, in the hushed laboratory, every faint click of glass and hum of machinery felt magnified. The new compound glowed softly, as if it contained the very essence of a star. Ethan's pulse quickened. He held the test tube firmly, sensing a steady, powerful thrum from within, a strength deeper and more stable than any energy he had ever encountered. Ethan stood over the lab bench, heart pounding. This was far more than an experimental breakthrough. It was the critical step toward the dream he'd chased his entire life. He drew in a steadying breath, then pressed the syringe plunger and let the serum flow into his veins. He knew the risks, unknown variables lurking in every milliliter, but fear had no place here. All that remained was determination. The moment the liquid entered his bloodstream, it felt as if molten iron raged through him. Pain flared so intense he thought his body would shred itself from the inside out. Ethan gritted his teeth and willed himself to endure, even as a fierce exhilaration bloomed in his chest. He sensed every fiber of his being realigning, cells rewriting their code, nerves forging fresh connections. Time stretched until the agony at last relented. In its place came a power unlike anything he'd ever known. His muscles tightened and swelled with newfound density. Lifting 1,000 pounds would feel effortless. His bones felt as solid as steel, able to withstand any blow. His very blood pulsed with unending vigor. And as his body transformed, so did his mind. Thoughts snapped into focus, his senses sharpened to a razor edge. He could almost taste the subtlest shifts in the air, hear the faintest mechanical hum in the distance. Ethan closed his eyes, a slow smile spreading across his face. He'd done it. The dream was within reach. Ethan advanced to the full-length mirror at the far end of the laboratory. He hardly recognized the man reflected back. Gone was the hesitancy he once felt. In its place burned a cold, steely confidence. When he looked into those eyes, he saw not fear or doubt, but absolute conviction. A fierce current of energy pulsed through his veins, as if every molecule in his body now answered to his will. He raised a trembling hand and touched his cheek, then whispered with barely contained triumph, "Now I am Super Bane." He turned slowly, letting the brilliant glow of the lab's overhead lights illuminate the familiar rows of equipment he'd spent years perfecting. Tonight marked the culmination of his greatest achievement. At last, the transformation serum had done more than strengthen his body. It had sharpened his mind into something truly formidable. A small, satisfied smile curved his lips. The plan can begin. Ethan's ambition had never been to seize Gotham's power. He wanted to obliterate it. Long ago, he had assembled a dirty bomb of terrifying potential and stashed it deep within this very facility. Until now, however, he'd hesitated to deploy it. He wasn't sure whether his old self, still battling the serum's side effects, could defuse the device once it was activated. If he failed, the bomb would detonate prematurely. If he succeeded, his entire scheme would be undone. But no longer. With Super Bane fully realized, there was no question. He was the only one who could unlock or unleash its might. He strode to a reinforced steel locker concealed behind a bank of cabinets and entered a code. Inside lay the dirty bomb he had nicknamed Armageddon's Seed. Carefully, he carried it back into the open lab, the weight of its devastation pressing against his senses like a living thing. Sparks danced across his fingertips as he examined the detonator's interface. A cold thrill ran through him. This act would set in motion a disaster the world would never forget. Ethan's smile widened. Gotham City would burn, and there was nothing left standing in his way. Bane's vengeance burned hotter than ever. He longed to see Gotham City engulfed in flames, to hear its innocent citizens cry out in despair. With the Court of Owls at his side, his plan moved into high gear. Under cover of night, a squad of Talon assassins slipped into every borough, hunting down gang leaders one by one. By dawn, Gotham's criminal empires had collapsed. The fragile balance that once kept the underworld in check shattered, and the city spiraled into chaos. Freed and twisted by Bane's machinations, the prisoners Ethan and Batman had subdued earlier poured onto the streets. They ransacked, burned, and slaughtered without mercy, transforming Gotham into a living nightmare. Criminals stormed City Hall, took government officials hostage, and brought the municipal machinery to a grinding halt. In the face of total anarchy, even Batman could no longer remain a shadow. He was forced into the open to try to restore order to a city on the brink of ruin. Chapter 661 Back Again. Ethan's heart sank the moment the alert flashed on his comlink. Bane had smuggled a dirty bomb into Gotham City. The news hit him like lightning. From the roof of Gotham's tallest skyscraper, he stared down at the city's flickering lights, but no glow could dispel the dread hanging in the air. If that bomb went off, it would be Gotham's darkest hour. Thousands of innocent lives could be wiped out in an instant, and the metropolis he'd sworn to protect might be reduced to radioactive rubble. Grief and anger churned in Ethan's chest, but there was no time to hesitate. Every second now mattered. He spun away from the ledge and disappeared into the shadows. In the blink of an eye, he had pulled on his armored black suit and adjusted his cowl. His boots made no sound as he leapt from rooftop to rooftop, dropping into back alleys and weaving through the maze of streets below. He scanned every broken pavement slab, every overturned trash can, every scorch mark, each anomaly a potential clue Bane had left behind. Ethan's keen gaze caught the faintest impressions. Tire tracks leading into a deserted warehouse district, the telltale scrape of heavy machinery against concrete, a shard of metal etched with coordinates. Piece by piece, he reconstructed Bane's path. He would find that bomb, and he would stop it. Gotham's fate rested on his shoulders, and he would not fail. With steady resolve, Ethan pressed onward into the night, determined to hunt down the dirty bomb before it could unleash its devastation. Ethan's battle with Bane's criminal network intensified with each encounter, driving home just how dire the threat had become. Not only did he face ruthless thugs enhanced by Bane's schemes, but he also had to remain constantly vigilant against traps laid by Gotham's most dangerous mastermind. Bane's revenge plan had progressed to the point of no return. Like a merciless demon, he was pulling the city's dark strings, sowing chaos and fear in every borough, not just to plunge Gotham into anarchy, but to shatter its spirit entirely. On his hunt for the dirty bombs that threatened to devastate the metropolis, Ethan ran headlong into one obstacle after another. Gang members loyal to Bane staged surprise attacks at every turn, Yet time and again, Ethan relied on his unmatched combat skills and indomitable will to overcome them. But hours of unrelenting fighting were beginning to wear him down. His body ached from dozens of fresh bruises and cuts, and exhaustion tugged at his resolve. Still, his eyes burned with unwavering determination. Just when fatigue threatened to topple him, a chilling presence materialized from the darkness. Bane himself strode forward, muscles coiled beneath his rigid vest, his lips curved in a cruel smile. "Ethan," Bane drawled, his voice cold as steel, "you finally showed up." Ethan's gauntleted fists flexed at his sides as he stared down his opponent. "Bane," he demanded, voice low and unwavering over the roar of collapsing debris, "where is the dirty bomb?" Bane's scarred lips curled into a mocking smile. "In a place only I know," he answered, his tone almost reverent, as if he were describing his greatest work of art. Ethan's jaw tightened. He was running out of options. Every gadget in his utility belt had been spent. His body felt battered and spent. Yet Bane stood before him, unnervingly calm, capable of delivering a final, fatal blow at any moment. Ethan drew a slow, steadying breath, forcing himself to focus. He'd have to rely on wit and sheer willpower to turn the tide. But this Bane was unlike any he'd faced before. Stronger, unpredictable, and utterly merciless. Without reliable intel on his adversary's new capabilities, Ethan risked misjudging his next move. With a sudden roar, Bane struck first. Their fists met in midair, with a violent crack that rippled through the surrounding air, like fabric tearing under immense pressure. Ethan's arm buckled under the impact. Pain lanced through his bones as he staggered backwards, scrambling for balance. Before he could recover, Bane was on him again. This time, the blow landed squarely in Ethan's chest, driving the air from his lungs as though he'd been struck by a wrecking ball. Pain exploded across his ribs, and the world rocked on its axis. Ethan crumpled to one knee, vision blurring, as Bane's triumphant laughter echoed in his ears. But even in that dizzying haze, Ethan's resolve blazed brighter than the pain. He couldn't give Bane the victory he craved. With grim determination, he planted his fist in the rubble-strewn ground and prepared to rise. The fight wasn't over yet. Ethan's shoulder slammed against the far wall with bone-jarring force, and he crumpled to the floor. He lay there, gasping for air, every breath feeling as though his ribs were being ripped apart. Summoning the last of his strength, he forced his head up and blinked through the haze of pain. Across the room, Bane stood unmoving, a look of cold triumph in his eyes. Each of Bane's steps echoed like a hammer blow, the weight of his presence pressing down on Ethan's chest and stealing what little breath he had left. "You actually thought you could beat me?" Bane's voice was low, dripping with scorn. "You're hopelessly naive." He folded his arms over his broad chest and leaned forward, as if savoring Ethan's defeat. Anger flared in Ethan's chest, hot and defiant. Though he knew he was beaten, his body a tangle of pain and exhaustion, he refused to lie down and die. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself up, knees trembling beneath him. His muscles burned, his vision swam, but still he refused to yield. Reality, however, proved relentless. His legs buckled under him, his arms could barely hold his weight. As Bane closed the distance, Ethan realized that physical strength alone wouldn't save him. Yet, even in the face of crushing defeat, the fire in his eyes burned brighter than ever. Batman staggered on unsteady legs, as if he might collapse at any moment. Bane watched his opponent's wavering form with a smug grin, each step forward as silent and deliberate as a cheetah closing in on its prey. Fear and despair clawed at Batman's chest, but he forced himself to breathe evenly, scanning for any opening to turn the tables. Then, in an instant, Bane struck. His massive arms shot out, seizing Batman's wrists and ankles in one crushing motion. A cold dread shot through Batman. He recognized the trap only when it was too late. Bane's grip was like iron, hauling him upright and forcing his body into a rigid, exposed arch. In that instant, Batman's mind flashed back to the night Ethan shattered his spine. His heart pounded as he realized what Bane intended to do. Desperation fueled his struggle, but Bane's hold never wavered. Like steel bands tightening around him, Bane's arms and legs pinned Batman immobile. He leaned in, delighting in the terror in Batman's eyes, his grin widening. Drawing in a deep breath, Bane suddenly drove his knees into the small of Batman's back while wrenching his limbs even tighter, intent on breaking him exactly the way Ethan once had. Batman's body arched sharply in midair, his spine groaning under unbearable pressure. He tried to muster a defiant growl, but Bane only tightened his grip, relishing every tortured sound. This time, however, the Dark Knight was no longer the broken figure he had been. After Ethan had once snapped his back, Bruce Wayne had upgraded the Batsuit with extra thick spinal plating. Now, under Bane's crushing hold, that reinforced armor began to protest. Metallic groans and jagged cracks echoed through the warehouse, each one a reminder that his defenses were nearing their limit. Fear coiled in Batman's chest. He'd believed these enhancements would withstand even Bane's legendary strength, but the mounting stress on his back armor spoke a harsher truth. It might not hold out much longer.